Meeting to order, please. You're on 7 o'clock. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes, December 5th, 2018.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of December 5th, 2018.
I have a motion, I have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Done. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a public hearing. An advisory opinion to the town council request for a zoning map amendment, AP5, Lot 6, 1658 Tomaquag Road, Joyce K. Luzzy / Joyce K. Luzzy Living Trust applicant or representative present. Mr. Nacarado, how are you tonight?
Very well. How are you?
Good, thank you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you and all of them. This is an actual downsizing of zoning. It's one of the few times I've ever been involved with anything going from industrial back to residential. But essentially this was zoned manufacturing for Nathan K's dental lab back in 1981. Something he did by himself. If any of you remember Nathan. Yeah. Good guy. But since he's passed away, the property is now with his niece in a trust, and they'd like to have it rezoned back to residential. The applicant also owns the property directly to the west, which is zoned R1, and is seeking to place this property back in R1. It has on an existing house, Nathan's old dental lab, which is a sizable building, but hasn't been used since his death, and a couple of garages. And I believe my partner asked for a waiver of certain items on the checklist, which are on the last page of the application. I don't think it's really the jurisdiction of the planning board to waive those. It's something that the council would consider.
I concur. So I drive by this site regularly. It's residentially, used as residential now.
Yes, it is.
Plan to be residential in the future.
Yes.
Any plans to connect to that adjoining piece? I realize they're two standalones now, so.
Yeah, it certainly would make sense, but there are no definite plans right now.
Anything else to add?
That is pretty much it.
Okay, planning board members, thoughts, questions? Mr. Nacarado? No questions. No questions.
I'm good.
Jim, thoughts?
Nothing beyond what I have in the memos.
Anything from the solicitor? Anyone in the audience wishing to be heard on this application? Barbara, yes.
Since it's a public hearing, could Jim explain what was on the memo?
Basically, I just described the proposal that the board has outlaid by Mr. Nacarado. And for the board, I just made a comment that the future land use map remains manufacturing. So the property right now, tonight, is zoned manufacturing. So right now, at this moment, zoning is consistent with the future land use map. Should this be approved by the town council to go to R1, you would then have an inconsistency between the zoning and the future land use map. But in this particular instance, as Mr. Nacarado laid out, it's certainly consistent with all of the land use in the area. R1's all around it. So, I can't imagine anybody having an objection to it. I suppose, the town could put them through a formal process where they amend the future land use map, at which point we come back to the town planning board here for a public hearing on future land use map change. have to be advertised for 3 consecutive weeks. You go to the town council, have a public hearing on a future land use map change, and we probably arrive at the same exact place. So, I don't know. There's a proper procedure to follow, and there's also something to be said for torturing an applicant unnecessarily, and I can't see doing that right now. But
We didn't ask for a change in the land use map, but if it's necessary, you know.
You know, the question of the future land use map designation has always weighed heavily in my decisions when it comes to rezones. But as I looked at the land use map in this particular instance, and it's really a question I'll pose to the thought question. Is it designated this way on the future land use map because it already is that way? And we were not envisioning a change?
true,
Just left it that way.
true.
Because that would seem, in my mind, to at least open the door to, well, listen, it's the only red dot in the middle of a sea of yellow. That's inconsistent to begin with. But if it's only a red dot because we left it there, it's a little bit, in my mind, a little bit different.
Yeah, I don't know the exact date that Red Dot was put on there, but again, it was,
Early 80s, did you say?
Nathan filed this in January of 1981.
And it was residential before that?
It was residential, yes. This is a classic example of spot zoning.
Well, it was a different.
It was a different era. It absolutely was.
Barbara, have we answered your question?
Yes, is that something that can be done coherently? So that you could do both changing it back to Res 1 and changing the land use map at the same time, at the same hearing? I mean, instead of making it two different issues?
well, this particular issue is a little bit further ahead in line, so to start the other process at this point, you'd have to hold this up.
So you could begin one and then continue with the other, and it would still have changed?
Correct. But the planning board has to report back to the town council on this request within 45 days, so there's nothing that would hold up the planning board's advisory to the council on this. And then, so the council could always hold up action until the applicant changes the future land use map. So we can do it anyway.
Just so that I'm clear, is the change of the future land use map essential for the rezone application to be considered by the council? Are they two separate and distinct issues?
I would say it's not probably, Kevin might weigh in. I'd say it's probably not essential from a legal standpoint at the local level here. Statewide planning naturally would like to see these inconsistencies resolved and not exist at all. But again, I think you have to look at the particular circumstances surrounding this case here tonight, and it's not much of a brainer.
Anyone else in the audience wishing to be heard on this? Yes, ma'am.
Can't he change his request to add that he wants to change the map? Can you do that now?
I'd have to file another application.
Okay.
Up to that would be up to the applicant. Yes, but he could certainly do that.
But if you accept changing the zoning, then the zoning will change, but the map wouldn't, right?
That would be correct. And actually, we're not doing that.
Well, then I ask another question. Can he do his application so by the time he gets to the town council to vote, both things are there for the town council to see at the same time?
I understand the question. I don't know about the logistics.
They could hold, you could always request holding up the zone change until the future land use map change catches up to it.
That would involve probably a delay in the zone change of a couple of months. Yeah.
Because you'd have to have a public hearing first here, advertised 3 weeks beforehand. Planning board would do its thing, goes to the council, another public hearing, 3 more weeks of advertising.
Yeah.
So again, it's the right way to do it, but is it really necessary in this particular case? I've seen the council do things that were a little bit, you know, further out than this. This is a, as you just pointed out, it's really down zoning. And making it consistent, as the chairman just pointed out, we're really bringing this property into consistency with all the properties around it. It's all
You
residential.
should dot all your i's. So he is gonna have to do the other part too. Okay?
Certainly do that, yes.
Especially with all the other zone changes, with
Yeah.
future land map changes that
Yeah.
are on the plate.
True, yeah, true. Yeah. Although this is not a solar project, but, you know, it's
Yeah.
true, you're right. I know the right way to do it.
Anyone else?
Yes. I think my concern is that when we were redoing the comprehensive plan, we had to spend, and not we, but Jim Lampier, had to spend quite a lot of time with the pieces that were non-conforming and talk to everyone individually in order to get them to go back to their normal state. So this is something I would like not to see happen when we have to do the entire comprehensive plan change. It would be something I'm sure that we have no problems with the zone change, but it would be very convenient to the town and whoever is the planner or the planning board to have this done legally and officially as well. So I think that's something to at least consider. We're not trying to cause a problem for the applicant, I don't think, and I don't think we're trying to make it harder for them, but we would like it to be consistent, because we'll have to handle it again later anyway.
Follow completely.
It would seem to me that it may be easier for the town to change it on its own.
Well, if we were close to updating the comprehensive plan, like previously we used to update it every 5 years. Now the state allows us 10 years. So we just got it updated. So we could wait 10 years and fix this. I will say this, one point in favor of doing the future land use map is, should the town change the zone and not the future land use map, now the future land use map remains manufacturing. Let's say they want to, you know, let's say they want to go back to manufacturing. I'd say you got the door open, you know that. So by changing the future land use map, you kind of, you know, seal make it a one-way trip. Well, comprehensive plan, future land use map is supposed to be the guiding map for zoning. So zoning is supposed to be consistent with that. It's the hierarchy. Again, not that the town council in its wisdom couldn't make any change and wanted to make it the local level for any reason whatsoever. They can do it. And we'll have it out with the state at some point in time, but again, so. It's whatever you want to do, whatever path you want to send them down, we can send them down. We're gonna get to the same place anyway.
Well, just so that I'm clear, the planning board here has a very specific charge this evening, and that is to issue an advisory opinion on the application. I am prepared to do that. What the town council decides to do, I'm presuming the applicant is going to stay his course, her course. Whatever the town council decides to do is completely up to them. So I'm not here to instruct the applicant that you have to change the future land use map. That's not my charge tonight.
Your charge tonight is an advisory opinion on a zone change, period. Now, if you're going to rule in your advisory opinion, is this change consistent with the comprehensive plan? Well, yeah, what can you say?
It's not.
Well, there's rationale. We've had the discussion as to why we think our ruling should be one way or the other.
Might not be consistent with the map, but it might be consistent with the neighborhood and the general thrust of the comp plan. So there's all different ways you can take this and interpret it, so.
What's the reason the applicant's coming before us with just the one and not both?
I had no idea that this was even in the works.
Because
This was,
normally we get both. In recent past, we've always had the map and the zone together. And is there a reason that we just have the one?
No, there's no particular reason.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think anybody wants to see that property used in a
Oh, no,
manufacturing, yeah.
no, right.
I think they just want to go back to residential since Mr. K's no longer with us.
So I would only caution that regardless of what the town council, the planning board decides to do this evening, you've already heard from a couple of councilors as to maybe what their preference is going to be.
Right.
I just want to take those words as
Sure.
advice. Anyone else in the audience? Before we close our public hearing and move on to a decision, should the planning board members feel so inclined? I see no hands. Okay. Planning board, discussion? Somebody care to make a motion?
Personally, I have no adverse feelings about letting Mr. Nacarado and his client move forward with this. As everyone has stated, it falls into line with everything else that's in the neighborhood. We're not going to manufacture anything anymore, and we move it under the town council, and they choose to do what they choose to do is beyond us anyway. I would say they're good, in my opinion.
I'm in agreement that although it is not consistent with the map, in my opinion, the consistency with the neighborhood is perhaps more important in this particular case.
I concur.
Simple drive up and down the street tells you that.
So if we make a motion, I guess it would have to be that the planning board supports this zone change from manufacturing back to R1 due to the bringing this parcel in line with the existing neighborhood, the parcel being AP5 Lot 6.
Is that a motion?
That's a motion.
Second. Wait a second for the discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Done. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next item on the agenda, under old business. Major land development, master plan submission, photovoltaic solar energy system, AP4 lot 25, 310 Main Street, Maxon Hill LLC, care of Anthony Del Vicario, applicant. The applicant and their representatives are present.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, John Mancini on behalf of the applicant and the property owner. As the chair noted, this is a continuation of the master plan review and public hearing. At the last hearing that we had presented to you a revised plan, if you will, or comments. We presented to you a plan which addressed many of the comments that we had received from Crossman Engineering, who was the peer reviewer engaged by the town. As a result of those comments, and as a result of the back and forth between the board, the developer has gone back, finalized plans. We also, at that point, requested some additional time so that the board could be able to digest both the plans as were presented at that evening, as well as giving your peer reviewer an opportunity to review the responses. The responses that were provided by the pre-engineering to Crossman were detailed, as were the comments that we received from Crossman Engineering. As a result, we believe that there has been a significant, we believe there's been significant progress made with regards to the plans. What we'd like to do this evening is to go forward with the presentation to the board. We have Dave Russo from the pre-engineering who's going to go through some of those plans, also go through in detail with you the comments from Crossman Engineering. We also have our landscape architect here available also to further describe and delineate for you some of the fencing issues that we had discussed at the last meeting, as well as the buffer. As you noted at that last meeting, the buffering has also changed as a result of what we are proposing. It's in fact greater, and we want to go through that with you as well. And we have also with us the engineering and some of our other experts available for any comments, questions, or concerns that you will have. I know that Crossman Engineering is address any comments or concerns that you have with regards to their report, and should they have any additional questions of us, we'll be more than happy and available to answer those questions. So with that, without further ado, unless you have any legal issues or questions of me, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Russo to walk you through the plans.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, David Russo with Dupree Engineering. Last month, as Mr. Mancini stated, we presented an alternative plan which eliminated 4 sections of the solar development. Those were, 3 of them were located in the center of the site, and 1 of them was located in the northernmost section. So after last meeting, the planning board said, like that alternative, we went ahead and updated our engineering plans, incorporating Crossman's comments by removing those areas, putting them back to existing forested areas or the existing state, and then modified our drainage. There was a few drainage basins in those areas that we eliminated. And then we also updated our fence plan, which was part of the discussion last month. So that's all been included on the revised plan. The Crossman comments we received on October 30th, and as I stated, we recently responded to those. We met with Crossman to go over the general comments. I know Crossman submitted a memo due to the time that they didn't have time to go through all the engineering in detail. We're actually going to meet with Crossman again in a week or two to go through those in detail and hopefully wrap up all the comments. Last month, one of the other comments was in regards to the topography of the site. We use LiDAR topography, which we found fairly accurate through past checks, what we did last month to go out and check it. And we went and checked all the drainage areas, which were the sensitive areas, and we found it to be within 6 inches of what we had shown on the plan. And we showed 2-foot contours, so we feel that that's accurate for this type of zone. As I stated last month, we have a Class 1 survey that's been recently done that we incorporated into the submission. We've completed all of Crossman's comments. There were some comments that Crossman had in regards to our drainage design, which we felt made it a more conservative design. The prior designs, we actually accounted for infiltration in our models, so we took credit for water entering the ground. This last iteration that we did, we made it very conservative by not taking that credit at all. So these ponds basically act as just frozen ground, so there's no infiltration, but obviously during the summer months, they will have infiltration, so it should overperform during those times of years. The fencing plan, we updated and included in your package. This didn't, the location of the fence got tighter, but we kept the same configuration. So on this plan, the red is black chain link fence, the purple is a silver chain link fence, and then as requested in the early stages of this, along the southern boundary, that's a panel fence, which Kevin Alverson will further speak about. And lastly, I'm just going to hit upon Crossman's memo. There's 3 items on there that they still had. I guess there's open items. One of them was general requirement 8.1, which was in regards to the zoning interpretation of how it's laid out relative to the setbacks. We've submitted a plan to Mr. Lanfear so we can meet with the zoning official to weigh in on that. The 3 areas that we're looking for some feedback from the zoning official are: 1 is there's a question about the drainage and the setback. We read the regulations as the drainage isn't part of the photovoltaic system as defined, so we have some of the drainage systems within the setback area. The other one was roadways in the front setback. Along Main Street, we have 2 driveways and turnaround areas which are within the front setback. It's obviously necessary to have some portion of the road in the setbacks to access the site. And then on Maxon Hill, there's a portion of the roadway that runs parallel to it that's within the setback. So the zoning official have to weigh in on that. If they come back and state that that shouldn't be in the setback, we'll look to shift it out of the the setback in those areas. That is achievable, if that's what they determine. The other question was about above-ground utilities within the setback. We don't have any equipment in the setbacks. What is required to come through that setback is above-ground utilities. The first connection to the fields are above-ground utility poles. And then once the minimum that are required, that's basically set by National Grid and the consultant, once those are installed, 4 or 5 of them, it goes on or down from there into the site. Crossman asked if, get as many of those in the setback as you can. We can try that when we're working with National Grid. If they allow us that bigger setbacks with those, we can try to get them into the site as far as possible. But everything inside the site is underground. And then the last comment that they had in the memo was in regards to the equipment being screened. And Kevin Albertson will speak to that further, but we believe that screening the entire solar fields themselves should screen the equipment that's internal also. So we've submitted back to Crossman and currently just waiting for them to complete the review of all the engineering detail. I'd be happy to answer any questions if board may have.
Great. Any more questions?
Are you going to speak to some of the questions we brought up last meeting? I think there was a question about containment for the oil, and is that going to come later?
Nicole Monofi from SAGE will speak to that.
And then I think you mentioned you're going to show us what it's going to look like, a rendering, and that's your landscape architect a little bit later.
Kevin Albertson will speak to that. I did relay all those.
Okay, so I had a question, and again, forgive me, it's a brand new layout, and I may have missed the rationale here. As I'm looking at the configurations at what I'm going to call the northwesterly and southwesterly corners of the site, there seems to be space between the easterly limits of the panel arrays and the westerly edge of the vegetated areas. It's not a small amount. Now, given the fact that you know that we're concerned about visibility from Route 3, refresh me on why those panels have not been shifted to the east.
They haven't been shifted. There's shading setbacks that were required to meet for the efficiency of the solar panels. With that being said, when Mr. Albertson presents his landscape plan, when we met with Crossman, there was discussion about some of that buffering along Main Street, which we recognize is very sensitive. And due to some of that buffering along Main Street, the solar developer is actually considering shifting that field a little further east, but they are sensitive to the shading that can occur from the trees. So that field itself may shift a little further east, but the tree line itself will remain the same.
So that's that westerly tree line that I just talked about? And is that the area that you're concerned about that might shade the panels?
Yeah, so shading the solar is typically on the east and west is a 2-to-1 ratio. So we have a 50-foot tree. They like to keep the panels 100 feet from that tree, and then the south is a 3-to-1 ratio. So that's why you have that area. That area is going to be planted or replanted with that's one of the areas that Mr. Albertson put in the meadow area, I'll call it. So they were going to reestablish that area.
This is the area between the easterly edge of the arrays and the westerly tree line?
That's correct.
Okay. So for what it's worth, I would be more of an advocate of shifting that stuff to the east. I think the meadow idea is great, but I don't know, my concerns are more about visibility.
I think when the landscape plans, with the landscape plan buffering along there, the solar developer is going to shift that because he's more concerned with the amount of plantings that's going to be along Main Street. So it's going to.
As long as the
That was
topic,
part of the discussion, actually.
as long as the topic is not on the table. Excellent. That was really the only primary concern I had with regards to your presentation.
Thank you.
Planning board members, anything else for?
Another, this comes up later now, but the area on Maxon Hill, one of the residents brought it up, and I actually drove by there and double checked it, that even this morning, there's water flows down, there's ice along the roads just from casual water. Once this area's cleared out, is that drainage going to be recorrected?
That's, I mean, we spoke about that last month. A lot of that drainage, we don't feel is from our site. Most of the slopes, there is a small watershed that goes that way, but we believe that a lot of that water is actually because there's a berm along the western edge, a natural berm. And I think a lot of the water just gets trapped and then ends up in that low point. So that's probably why it's freezing too. It
Just
has
concerned
nowhere- it has nowhere to go.
Increase once.
We have a hydrology analysis that shows not increasing any water. There's a small watershed in the southwest area, but our analysis shows not increasing water to that area. If anything, we're decreasing it substantially.
Actually, Mr. Russo, there's one more question that it's a little bit different than we've seen before. So you're making these concrete troughs, is that right, to move the water along?
No, he's speaking about the stone.
Yes.
No, the stone infiltration trenches are just it's an open trench. So the stone just, if you're looking at it on the surface, there'd be grass and then there'd be crushed stone visible, and it just has a depth to it, so the water just enters that crushed stone area.
So there's not going to be, I guess I was confused because there was this whole thing about the cement mixing and where the cement trucks were going to clean out and all of that. And what was that referring to? Do you recall?
I mean, there's pads for the construction pads, the
Okay.
posts themselves, depends on how they install them, there's not
Right.
significant.
Okay.
Yeah. That's part of the DM requirement, we have to show that on the site plan regardless of how much concrete is going to be on the site.
Planning board members, anything else?
No, I'm good.
Thank you.
Jim, anything on you? Disappear yet. Jim, anything on your end? Anyone in the audience for this particular expert?
What was the megawatt AC for this project at this time? What's it been downsized to?
It was originally 11.75 megawatts AC. This new configuration is 10.63, actually.
Over how many acres of solar?
The panel area, are you asking?
Yes.
The panel area is approximately 16 and a half acres.
And following that up, the two isolated areas of solar panels, how much are there in megawatts, or how much is the percentage of the whole project are they?
I'd be taking a total guess. I don't have it all broken down, which each one actually is based on that 10.3.
One of the things,
I'm sorry.
one of the things I was wondering, I brought up before the idea of tracking systems as a way to increase the efficiency of an installation. I've done some more research and see that they're being used quite a bit now in Canada, so it's not necessarily an impossible thing to do in the United States. And most of the tracking systems, most of the systems built in the United States in entirety, 70–80% of them are tracking systems. And if there was enough efficiency, they might be able to keep that same 10.63 megawatts, but bow out of those two other areas entirely. And that would certainly be, that would address a number of issues. Certainly a much better looking plan already than the first one that was just circling around the wetlands. But I'm not looking to hurt the applicant. I'm just wondering if they're really up to speed with a fast changing industry. And it would certainly be a better project for our town if they were able to do that. So I would like, if there's some way that that could be considered by the board.
Interesting thought. Let's ask the applicant.
Yeah, I'm not one to speak about different systems and efficiency of each system, but I do, the last meeting was brought up about the east-west systems. The applicant is moving forward, wants to move forward with a fixed post-driven system. Doesn't want the mechanical components of the tracking system, and this is what they want to move forward with. That a lot of the design analysis goes into these, so to go backwards and start looking at other systems at this point, I don't think the applicant's interested in doing that at this point. The east to west system we brought up at the last meeting, did look into that a little bit. That system to me seems, it gets a lot tighter, but as far as any type of growth around the systems or grass growing, I find that to be very challenging, that type of system.
Okay, very good, thank you. Yes, Barbara?
I just have a question, 10.63 kilowatts, megawatts?
Megawatts,
Thank you.
AC.
AC?
Was there another question after that? I'm sorry. Okay. Yes?
Can I ask a general question? I also work for New England Airlines at the Westbury Airport. And so I've been made aware that RIAC is buying the power from Amoresco, and I want to know what the relationships are between LLC, the Mason, whatever, Maxim Hill LLC, and Amoresco and RIAC.
I can address that.
Yes.
So Maxon Hill LLC is the actual property owner. That at the time of the, once this has been finalized, the property is going to be sold. Amoresco is the actual holder of the power, if you will, the manager of the power, the entity that's actually going to operate, manage, and coordinate the power on this site. The end user is going to be the Raleigh Airport Corporation. They have a power purchase agreement. The power purchase agreement is for the power that's going to be generated from this site. It's going to be managed by Amoresco, operated by Amoresco, who is a very well-known national company that this is what they do. So this is the process. The process is for this project to be approved. Once it's approved, it will be conveyed to Amoresco. Amoresco will develop it, and once the development of that is completed, the power that's generated from that will be from the state agency and will be utilized by the Raleigh Airport Corporation.
Good, thank you. Answer the question?
Wait a minute. I got one first. My understanding of such things is that you're not building an electric line from here to RIAC.
No.
So RIAC's getting credits from National Grid.
That's correct. That's called net metering.
So there's a sharing arrangement there?
Right.
Sorry about
I
that.
just want to make sure we've answered the question.
Right, and I have one more, but
I interrupted her, so.
You did. I'm sure there's a price to pay later.
Yes,
on.
Oh, yes, so, right. So, Maxim Hill LLC was going to sell their rights or whatever to Amoresco.
I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Maxim Hill is going to sell their rights to Amoresco.
The real estate, correct.
Okay.
So the approvals, just so we're clear, and then maybe this is where some confusion lies, whenever a property receives an approval, whether it's a special use permit or it's a dimensional variance or it's an approval such as this, it runs with the land. The approvals are never personal. They don't run to the applicant or to the landowner. It runs in perpetuity with the real estate, just like you saw earlier where someone got a zone change in 1981 and here they are now, 30 some odd years later, seeking for another zone, seeking for another change. It always runs with the land. So what the next owner is going to receive will be the land with the entitlements. And the entitlements are essentially the proposed building with whatever approvals the town is granting.
That, fine. My real question is, shouldn't we have, I think we're trying to put in the solar ordinance that the town should have, be made aware of when those transactions happen.
And it will be, because they're actually recorded in the land evidence records with the town. So,
But I thought we were supposed to make, we would maybe like to get 30 days notice. You're kind of implying that you're already gonna sell it to Amoresto, or it's already sold? Or is it,
well, nothing's been sold, we can't
Okay.
sell anything.
Okay.
We can't sell anything until
I got
until
you.
we've got it, but, I mean, we have no issue with informing the town. In fact, we recall, this is already permitted by way of a zone change. And in that zone change, there are specific stipulations. They have to be abided by whomever ends up with the property. Those can never change. And whatever additional stipulations that the planning board would put on these approvals also run with the land. So whether it's Mickey Mouse that owns it or Donald Duck, they still have to.
Well, we'd like to know who it is, so 20 years from now, we're
Yeah.
not scrambling, trying to figure out who owns it now, and
Yeah,
who's
that's,
responsible for decommissioning, et cetera.
yeah, that's a very important point, because one of the stipulations is the decommissioning, and that would run with whoever ends up with these approvals. So we don't have a problem identifying who the operator is, because there ultimately has to be a cooperative effort between the town and the operator to ensure that, these measures are being enforced, or they're being put in place so the town can't enforce them if they're not. The good thing about this is we know now, and you'll know at the time of final approval who your operator is going to be and who your end user is going to be. And your end user is a state agency, so that actually elevates the project from an economic standpoint as far as the state's concerned.
Good, thank you. Answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Richard Langseth, and I was the one who brought up this RIAC stuff, because I was at the RIAC board meeting when this came up, and this is the reason why I got involved in all of this. Now, if you look at what the town council did, of course, they promised that net metering would go to the town. And what's happening now is all the net metering is becoming virtual net metering and is going to a state agency, which I think the town council, and perhaps you folks ought to know, that one of the bases for this whole zone change is now changed because the Rhode Island Airport Corporation is taking all of the power. I think that's a very important point. There are other points that I'd like to bring up later on in the meeting. However, this is really important because the jurisdictional issues have enormously complicated themselves, because at this point, Amoresco is a wholesaler of the energy to RIAC, and that Amoresco doesn't control the facility. So this means that with the wholesaling agreement, it becomes a federal matter. It's now under the jurisdiction of FERC, not the Rhode Island PUC. And it probably is always under the jurisdiction of FERC anyway, because ISO New England is the one who actually controls the gate. So the planning board really needs to know who at the federal or state level is going to have jurisdiction over this issue, and maybe the applicant can explain that.
Very good, thank you.
So one important point is that if the planning board, I'm sure, is aware, there is no stipulation on this zone change that any net metering or any power be developed or purchased by the town. There will be a megawatt that's available if the town wants it. We'll be more than glad to offer it to them. Secondly, there's, again, no restriction or condition on the zone change that in any way impacts, prohibits, or hinders our ability to sell power to, whether it be net metering or virtual metering, however so it does. It's not what we refer to for subdivision regulations. Your guideline is simply to look at the zone change as enacted by the town council, and then to review the project in compliance with that zone change, with the stipulations, in conformance with your subdivision regulations, which is what we're doing here. If for whatever reason the net metering doesn't work with RIAC or whomever, I mean, that's a risk that the developer takes. But I think one of the things that was important, one of the fundamental questions the town council has, and I know this board has, is this project feasible? Because you don't want something in place that doesn't happen, and B, if it does happen, it fails. What we can tell you is we have at least assurance that A, it will happen, and B, it will be successful because the user is a good user. I don't see why that would be of issue or concern. I mean, it's definitely something of discussion, but it's not something within the purview of the planning board to make a decision as to whether or not to meet your subdivision regulations.
Very good, thank you. Before I come back, anyone else that has not posed a question? Otherwise, I'll return. Barbara, you had your hand up first.
I just wanted to say he's absolutely correct. there is no net metering coming back to the town at all. There's nothing, there's no arrangement between their project and the town at all. No, zippo.
Thank you for clarifying
If I could, if we could just back up for a second.
that. No,
You stated that there's a megawatt available that could be funneled back to the town.
Right.
So that would be 9.63 to the airport, 1 megawatt to Hopkinton, if I understand
That's
that
correct,
correctly.
right, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right. But there's no obligation for Hopkinton to take it.
3 megawatt, of course we'll take it.
I don't think it was free.
Yeah.
Well, not
no.
free.
This is a free country, but nothing's free.
yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I may be confused here, but the town ordinance that modified the comprehensive plan included, as conditions for approval of the proposed changes, the petitioners and their successors in interest must adhere to the following. And item 14, the applicant will allow the town the option to purchase metered credits in order to lower its electricity costs. So I probably misunderstand what's going on here. But from what I heard from RIAC is that they're going to take every ounce of the juice, all of it. And this is not what is being proposed here, I believe.
Well, as council has already pointed out, we're obligated to follow the conditions of that approval right there. So if somebody wants to make a case that that approval means that they must deliver power to the town, then so be it. That's not really what the planning board is going to wade into. That was a town council decision. Someone else has to sort out that language. But thank you for bringing that forward.
With that, Mr. Chairman, unless there's any further questions of me or Mr. Russo, I'd like to have our landscape architect kind of walk through the buffers and the designs as presented. Good evening, my name is Ken Albertson. I'm a registered landscape architect at City Rhode Island. Been charged with the landscape architectural component, including buffering and visual aesthetics for the facility. Happy New Year to everybody. As Mr. Russo has given a good overview and introduction, at the last planning board meeting, there was a significant design change that was made available to the town. The Engineering has revised the layout, including the solar array placement, as well as the other permanent components, the inverters, inverter islands, things of that nature. As you can see, the revised layout does offer significant connection for wildlife and also preservation of the existing forested lands. It actually provides a clear corridor from the northeast of the site all the way down to the southern edge of the site, where there's various different wetland systems. Crossman Engineering had provided us with comments on the previous layout. Obviously, with the significant design changes, they've changed the buffering as well for the site, so that has been updated accordingly. In a nutshell, some of the concerns were, as the board has mentioned previously, certainly view corridors along Route 3, but also along Maxon Hill Road, generally just being consistent with the character of the surrounding neighborhood. So the buffering along Route 3 on the northwest and southwest sections of the site abutting the solar array, there was a comment made about the spacing on the vegetation because of the concern about what the buffering would be at their initial installation. We have actually decreased the spacing on all of the vegetation. Evergreen trees, it's between 7.5 and 6 feet on center spacing. For shrubbery, it's between 4 and 5 feet on center. We've also increased the size of all the vegetation, so evergreen trees going in will be a minimum of 8 to 10 feet tall for some of the smaller evergreens, and 10 to 12 feet in size for the larger evergreens, which in turn with the decreased spacing has increased the plantings by a considerable amount. That's consistent along Route 3 as well as Maxon Hill Road. So your package actually has blow-ups of each individual area. We focused on the northwest section, the southwest section, and then 4 different areas along the eastern portion started by Maxon Hill Road. As far as the buffering, the plantings are concerned, those are illustrated on those enlargement plan sheets L1 through L6, I believe it is. Beginning with sheet L1, you can see that the spacing of the vegetation has been increased significantly. In addition, the redesign of the drainage system along that western section of the site, they've eliminated the large detention basin that was closer towards the project entrance. It's been replaced with a stone trench, which, as Mr. Russo has described, is essentially an open stone trench that has certain depths to it. So it doesn't actually have much of a profile at all. It's essentially flush with grade around it. That allowed us to actually minimize the grading up along Main Street, Route 3 in that area. And we maintained a buffer of between 15 and 30 feet of non-touched vegetative buffer. In that area, there's also about a 10 to 15 foot grade differential between where the solar panels are and where Route 3 is. And you'll see on sheet L7, there's a cross-section that illustrates that grade differential and the existing and proposed vegetation. So in that area, you'll see there's about a 15 to 30 foot of existing vegetative buffer that remains. On the back side of that, aka the uphill side of that, we're providing a double buffer of shrubbery, evergreen, and deciduous vegetation, as well as a full evergreen tree buffer in that area. In addition, one of the comments from Crossman Engineering was about providing more habitat areas. There's an area at the northwest section of the site that did have some presence of Asclepias tuberosa, which is butterfly milkweed. So what we've done is created a buffer, a pollinator meadow habitat that I referred to earlier in various areas strategically placed around the site to provide a little bit more biodiversity and habitat area. One of those areas is at the back of that buffer along Route 3 between the stone trench and the vegetative buffer, and that shows on that cross-section detail. It was also referred to before that we do have a larger area closer towards the eastern side of that solar array. Again, as Mr. Russo has mentioned earlier, we've had discussions about during the preliminary phase, as we're fine-tuning the actual layout of a lot of the panels and components. There's been interest in actually shifting that further east, which is going to be something that's going to be looked at as we get further into the preliminary stage of the design. But in addition, there's some pollinator habitats all along the edges where it abuts, in strategic areas, abuts perimeter wetland areas. We found that that's actually good habitat areas because it provides foraging and nesting habitat for a lot of the birds and a lot of the predators that live within the tree portions of the site. So that's all the areas that you see hatched in the red throughout the site. All in all, it's about 6.75 acres of new pollinator habitat that we're providing. Back to the areas along Route 3, the cross-section on sheet L7 notes it. You'll also see there was a comment from Crossman Engineering about, similar comment about
the spacing of vegetation at the southwestern edge of the site. This is on sheet L2. What we've done is worked with Dupree Engineering on their updated design to minimize the amount of the service access drive coming into the southwest section of the site. Again, the basin area has been eliminated, which eliminated a lot of the grading in that area, which helped us to maintain as much vegetation along the roadway and at the southwest corner of the site as possible. In that area currently, there's not a whole lot right there that's larger vegetation. There's about a 6-foot grade differential between the road and where the solar panels are. But as you can see, we've eliminated a significant amount of panels closer to the road. So it gives us a little bit more ability to be able to have an increased tree buffer there, which is shown. So I know there was a request of the board to provide a little bit better of a graphic representation of what we're talking about. This is at the northwest corner of the site, looking southbound on Route 3. This is the existing condition of the vegetative buffer, which is going to remain for about 30 feet in that area. There's some spotting of amelanchier, serviceberry, some red cedars, some white pines. That will be maintained to the greatest extent practical, and then infilled behind. This is actually shown at initial installation height. You can see the vegetation behind here. That's 10 to 12 feet for white pines, 8 to 10 for spruces. And you can see that because of the additional 6 feet of grade change, or 15 feet of grade change that we have there, we actually have a full-on buffer through. And
Is
then
that
this,
A1, sir?
I'm sorry?
Is that A1
That is,
on my sheet? Is this for this one? Section A1?
that's correct. Yep. Generally in that area, it's actually looking from pole 260, if you see that on sheet L1 of your plan set, you can see it looking back. So that's an initial installation, and then this is at 4 years growth, which, as we always say, first year plants sleep, then they creep, then they leap in the third year, so this is in the 4th year. At the southwest corner of the site, we did a similar study. There is a cross-section shown as 2, actually shown on that sheet. There's B1, and then C1 actually comes through the abutting property to the south. I was not able to get onto the property there to do a full picture and illustration, but to generally give you the character of what it looks like along Route 3. This is going northbound on Route 3 from pole 277. So you can see that the vegetation is smaller in this area, but we do have about 5 or 6 feet grade differential. This is at year 1 install, 10 to 12 foot pines, 8 to 10 foot spruces, and then again at year 4. You can see the infill. We did similar studies along Maxon Hill Road. If you flip to sheet L7, I believe, or L8, I'm sorry. Where the site actually does start to begin, which is at or around AP4 lot 53, so back to the original sheet. Sheet L3 is left in the plan set for consistency purposes, but essentially it's all just left in the condition. This is sheet L4, so if you go back to the key sheet, but you can see we've increased the buffer all the way along Maxon Hill Road, same spacing as discussed earlier. But we did do some studies where the elevation is not so great through here. There's only about a couple feet of grade differential between Maxon Hill Road and the site. This is at or around lot 53 F. There's a cross section there on sheet L8. You can see the
D1 or E1?
that is E1, near E1.
Okay.
So near E1, you can see that there's not much grade differential, but that's a human analog at 6 feet tall. Essentially, what you'd be looking at is the bottom base of the panels. So the grade is essentially at grade, if you can imagine that. So the buffer that we'd be providing is between the access roadway and the 30-foot area that we're maintaining along that entire Maxon Hill Road. It's minimum of 30 feet, goes up to 50 feet in certain areas. And then this is an artist's rendering of what, this is actually looking down to where the power lines kind of come into the site. Here's an existing shot up on top. And then this is in the first year growth.
Is that going north to south?
This is looking south. And then, again, this is at 4 years growth. Did a similar study looking north from the south east corner of the site. So that's near cross-section F, although cross-section F runs north and south through the abutting property. So abutting the roadway, this is near the project maintenance access at the southeast corner of the site. You can see the existing vegetation. There's a lot of trees, a lot of oaks and things in there, not a lot of understory vegetation. There's some small beech trees, some small oak saplings and things. We're maintaining a buffer along there for the 30 feet, and then on the back side of that, and interspersed where needed for supplemental vegetation. This is that first year's growth. A mixture of hollies, white pine, spruce, kingsberry, some native rhododendron.
Did you see that, were those oaks leafed out, or are they?
This is winter time.
So are they, a lot of our oaks were gypsy moth down.
Yeah, there's a lot of dead oaks
Yeah.
everywhere through
So
this entire
I
site.
don't know if those oaks are actually real oaks or just soon to be cut down oaks, but, okay.
Yeah, well, for the purpose of the illustration,
Right.
I don't know yet. But there was a lot of deadfall in there, so that's why we're going to maintain what we can. I think from a safety standpoint, dead trees need to come down where necessary. But that's why we're providing the increased buffer the entire road. So without the existing vegetation, we just feel from a natural standpoint to make it look like the character of the neighborhood, to maintain as much of that vegetation as we can.
Oh, sure.
And then this is at 4 years. I think that's pretty much it. There was a question about what type of panel fence was along that southern property line, and it's all we're looking at doing is a steel post cedar or similar fence from a maintenance standpoint. The natural wood, this is just a regular dog-eared top. It'll be finished side out towards the abutter, steel post inside towards the project site.
But there's isn't there a natural buffer in between?
There is. There's maintained along there at least 30 feet of natural buffer. And we're actually planting in front of the fence as well as behind the fence. So once the fence silvers out, it'll fade into the background. But as it was discussed early on in the project that it was desired along that property line, so we've considered that in this design.
The one comment I would make about the fence is that your plans send you in a circle because it's stated on engineering plans, the landscaping plans, and the landscaping plans say the engineering plans, and there was no picture of the fence or what exactly. And on the engineering plans, it mentions cloth, or my impression was a fence that had, I didn't,
No,
yeah,
I
it was
think,
kind of weird. So,
is it referring to the vinyl coating?
yeah, I don't think it was the vinyl coating, but I can read it exactly. about the slats. It was just kind of a weird commentary. I'll have to find it.
You may be referring to, you may not be, I'm just guessing, there's a silk fence detail, which is used for erosion control.
No, I
Goes
double
up.
checked actually, Mr.
Oh,
Russo. But thank you for pointing that out. So I did see that as well. Sorry. It's a lot of stuff. One second.
I see what you're speaking about, it's really small print on our fence detail, which is a standard chain link fence detail. It calls it out, it
Yeah.
refers to the chain link as a fabric, but it's just chain link, they just refer to it, it's just a typical.
Yeah, and then it goes on. Actually, can you read it further, Mr. Russo? It's on the little pieces of paper?
Sheet 17.
Sheet 17 up in the top right corner. It says chain link fabric top salvage option. It's
Salvage.
Yeah, salvage.
It's on the little ones, huh? It's kind of weird. So you said sheet 17?
Sheet 17 in the top right corner is the typical chain link fence detail.
No, it wasn't that. It was a bigger verbiage somewhere. No, that's not what I was referring to. It was in your engineering plans. I'm sorry. The general notes. It was discussing the fence, and it said that it was going to be having slats. And it discussed the pole, and then it discussed exactly what it was going to be, and it mentioned fabric, which I thought was a little weird. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm sure we can provide further detail
Okay.
for the next,
Okay.
for preliminary on that, but the intention of the fence, if there's discrepancies between the fence, and I can understand the circle of both of us going back and forth.
Right.
But the fencing, where it's regular chain link fence, the fabric is always typically placed on the outside of the fence. I'm not sure if that's what you're
Oh, wait,
referring to.
I found it. Actually, it's here. It says perimeter fencing along AP4 lots 31, 33, 37, and 60 shall be, those are those lots here, right? That's where your fencing is. It shall be 6 feet, the height is 6 feet, solid panel privacy, fencing with galvanized steel posts. All fence posts shall be on inside edge of fence. And it says fabric and privacy panels to face abutting properties.
Yes, so that the fabric for chain, that's a catch-all note, but for chain link, it's the material is referred to as the fabric. That's
Okay.
placed on the outside. For the panels, for the solid panel fence, those typically come in 8-foot sections.
Okay.
And so those are the panels
Oh,
themselves.
okay, all right, so you're not putting fabric?
No.
Okay, all right, but then it says, see engineering plans for final specified locations and details. Then the engineering plans, it references this, but there was no final picture of the fence.
Of the fence.
Yeah.
That, we can certainly provide
Okay.
a
Well,
picture
just because we're
associated
talking
with that.
about this is all going to be bought and sold by other people, I wanted to be clear
Yep.
what we're agreeing to, so.
Yes,
Right.
we can further detail, or I can include those images for the
Yes.
fence, so we have a description of what that is. that we said we did that.
Okay, are we down to questions? No? Good. If you could take me back to your photographs at the northwesterly corner, please, where we show, I'll call them existing conditions and then your planted conditions. Excellent, thank you. So I'd like to just make sure I tie what you're attempting to illustrate to the notes that appear on your plan. I'm just going to choose L1, and it's under your planting schedule, note 1.1, I'll read that to you in just a moment, but if you could just leave that up there. So I'm looking at that wonderful photo, and of course you've taken it at an oblique angle, which tends to visually densify what I'm looking at. If I was standing and looking 90 degrees into the site, it would not look like that.
That's correct.
Good. So, when we now go to your note that says that there's going to be discussion and evaluation of densifying plantings, is that written up?
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that the town plays a greater role. I don't, and no disrespect intended, but the town's engineering representative doesn't live here. I live here. When I go stand on that site, and I'm looking at your bottom photograph now, and it doesn't look like that, I want to make sure that the town has the ability to step in and say, you need more planting there. So however we need to make that connection, I want to make sure the plans reflect that.
Sure, I know we've had discussions certainly about, this is something that we felt as though, obviously, you never know until everything's starting to go in.
I understand.
That we've offsized all the plants, we've minimized, we've tried to do our best effort to make sure that we're providing the maximum amount of screening possible. There's always going to be the potential that they're certainly not, they're not opaque, no vegetation is. But we're doing our best effort for that. And so the reason why we had mentioned that, and this has come up at several different hearings before, is that we'd like to be able to have the ability to install our plantings. If there is concern about lack of buffering in certain areas, we'd like to be able to have that discussion and remedy it as needed. But we need to also have some ability that we can come to an agreement as to what that is. I know that our task is to obscure all the solar components from the surrounding neighborhood, as well as houses from the first floor. I feel like our design, that's what it's meant to do. If there are questions that come up afterwards, that's something that I know the applicant has been willing to work with the town on.
So you want to set a performance standard?
Well,
Basically, you want to say no matter how they're going to get there, in the end, we want a certain performance level from the roads looking at.
yeah, exactly. And I just want to you certainly pointed in the right direction. I'm not criticizing. I just want to tighten this up, because right now, the verbiage says that it's the owner's representative, the owner, and the municipality's third-party representative engineer that's going to make this evaluation. It's not quite good enough for me, okay? Because from my side of the table, I'm not prepared to put my confidence in the representative engineer. Not because they don't know what they're doing, don't get me wrong. It's only because they don't live here. And I would want the town to be able to come to the zoning official, planner, and say, we think we need more here, and then have it executed. Am I making myself clear?
Yeah, if I may, that's actually one of the points that was discussed in the peer review, and I think what the plans are reflecting may not be the ultimate end result. What we thought would be helpful in discussion with the peer review is to have an independent third party be the ultimate arbitrator on that. I mean, you're going to have the owner's representative, because you have someone who's going to represent the owner, and the town can have their representative, whether it be the planning board, the town council, the building official, the town planner, say you need more plantings, and then have the third party, your peer reviewer, Crossman Engineering, be the party that determines where they should go and how they should be put in there, rather than just having the building official come up and say we need more rhododendrons here. We thought it'd be better suited for a professional to determine what type of plantings, where and how they want them to be planted. The owner doesn't care. If the town wants it, the owner's going to do it. We just want to make sure it's done in a professional, logical, and mediated manner.
I understand completely, and again, I just want to ensure that the town collectively
Yeah.
has input into how that's done.
Oh, yeah.
It's a mechanical thing.
Yeah,
So we
no,
can work
it's
it out.
logistics, and we can do that on the plans or as a stipulation of approval, however you feel comfortable with that. And important to note, you know, like the comment about these plans, the property switching hands, I mean, these plans are all going to be recorded. Every notation is going to be in there for scrutiny after the approval. If they're part of the record, we can make them as exhibits to the approval, if it makes it in 11 by 17, and record that in land evidence records, if that makes the board even more comfortable to ensure that there's full knowledge and understanding for successors and assigns to know what their requirements and obligations are. We can make them as conditions of your final approval. So we'll find the best method to ensure that full knowledge is being passed on to successors and assigns. If that's a concern to you, we will alleviate that.
It is always a concern because we are in the business of people not reading plans.
I know.
So we have to go over and above. This is a complicated project.
And that's
And
perfectly
just
understandable.
wanna make sure
I'm in the
we're covered.
business of fine print, so we can work together on that.
I have a question. This might be directed to our solicitor. At a previous meeting, Mr. Nacarado was standing up for the applicant, and the statement was made, we'll put in as much as required to make everybody happy. Is that legally binding, or does that need to be put in?
Well,
It was recorded, it was here.
it's a helpful history about what the overall intent was, but this wordsmithing and procedures that have been just talked about between Mr. Diorio and Mr. Mancini, that's how you implement that intent. So it's helpful, but it's not specific enough to.
So my question is, I guess the answer that you're giving me is, that's not actually binding. We need to have something in writing, in some sort of an agreement.
It's binding in the sense that it's a declaration of the intent of the parties. But the devil's in the details, which is what they're talking about. So if it comes down to a dispute over what does this mean, they'll say, well, what was the intent? What was the goal that began this process? And that's very clear. So it is binding in that sense. It's the clearest statement of what the parties were trying to agree to. But it has to have some form, descriptive form and functional setup to actually, I mean, you can't say the town's going to do it. It's got to be somebody specified for that. So this is what they're talking about. That I wouldn't say it's not binding, because it is binding, but it's a general principle from which all the rest of this discussion flows. I don't know how else to answer.
My intent for bringing this up is not to, bring undue heat on you guys, but some of the people from Maxon Hill have contacted me. I mean, I've been in this town for a long time. They said, well, what are we going to see? We don't want to come out of Collins Road and see a lot of mechanical stuff. So if there's some way that they are actually protected from that, I don't know.
Well, I think your comments well taken. The intent is to do exactly that, is to screen and buffer. The goal is to ensure that the language is appropriately memorialized so that there's no question from the town side or from the applicant side or the owner side as to what the obligation is to do. And what we're proposing is we'll put it in writing and we'll develop a mechanism that gives the owner input, gives the town input, and then sets a third-party arbitrator referee to ensure that it gets enforced. And what we would propose to do is I can submit it to you as a condition of preliminary plan in writing, so that way we can see it and we can digest it, and then we know it's a condition of approval. Here's what the screening is, here's what the mechanism for ensuring that proper adequate screening has been fulfilled and effectuated by the owner. And if it's not, this is the mechanism to ensure that it will be.
Good, thank you.
Yes, the whole kind of a maintenance schedule or annual review period or something?
Yeah, one of the stipulations in the zone change is that regardless of who the owner is, the town has a right to inspect this property every April. So there's an annual inspection that takes place in April. That's that's the obligation of the town. And that's actually condition number. It's one of your conditions. Yeah, so after the completion of the project, the applicant and any future owners will allow the town to conduct an inspection in April of every year for the life of the project, and will reimburse the town for this cost. So that's actually, what we can do is a sort of piggyback, if you will, on that inspection to determine after the following every inspection and every April annually, that the buffer is adequately being maintained as provided. So we can follow that restriction.
Anything else, planning board members? Anything to add?
Not to this.
Anyone in the audience for the landscape architect?
I appreciate everything you're doing, and I do think you're doing a great job at it. I have two comments. One is the panels begin at 3 feet and go up to 12 feet. So a 6-foot planting doesn't mask a 12-foot solar panel. And it's not going to for a long time. There's nothing you can do about planting the trees, they're only going to grow so fast.
I'm sorry to interrupt, the
Yeah, but
panels
there's
8 foot.
two things. You can answer them both. So the panels go up 12 feet, up to 12 feet.
8 to 9 is the max.
8 to 9, it's still above 6. So you're probably going to see them for some time regardless. The other issue is on the Maxon Hill side, if you find that all of the owners on Maxon Hill are adamant about not looking at the solar panels, you might want to consider that privacy fencing solid wood slat all the way down. Do some buffering in the front, buffering in the back, but you won't be coming back and forth every year filling in plants that can only grow so fast, if that's going to become a major issue. Because chain link does not, with every buffering you want to do, will not mask something that begins 2 or 3 feet off the ground and goes up 8 or 9 feet. It's just not going to happen. But I think you had it with all good intent, but you may just want to block it out and make it a block, put some plants in the front, plants in the back, and they at least block the first 6 foot of something that's going up 9. It's just a suggestion,
Interesting idea.
because it's almost impossible to block that high.
Anyone else? Questions? Yes, sir.
One point, you mentioned spruce. On our farm, the spruce is all dying. Native white spruce is not a very good idea in Rhode Island, so I assume you're talking about some kind of blue spruce or something like that.
Actually, I have not seen as much dieback on the white spruce as I have.
Going by like this.
I'm just going to check it out. I would certainly take that into consideration before.
Yes, ma'am.
What's the plan for the stone walls that go along Maxon Hill Road?
Those are going to be maintained. They'll remain in place.
Are those boundary walls
They're-
that she's referring to on?
Yeah, so yeah, those are boundary walls that can't be touched.
Thank you. See, there was a hand. Yes, sir.
So do you really think that a 30-foot buffer, you're going to block the view of this array? Because I live on Collins Road and Ball Maxon Road, and I drive up there stop sign every day, and I don't want to see it. Your language is right on, as far as I'm concerned, as their language isn't. It leaves too much variance for someone else. You're saying the town, which is us, should be able to say, I can still see that, I want that fixed, I want more. But it's only 30 feet. I can't see how you can cover with 30 feet.
Well,
It's just, I think I don't know who you're trying to tell that to, but you're not telling me you're going to you're gonna cover that mess up in 30 feet.
It's a point well taken, hence I think Barbara has an interesting idea, the applicant may want to think about.
Wanna look at Pine Woods, along the road?
So let's address that, as that thought was being raised in my mind, I'm thinking, you know, if a residence was there and someone chose to erect a fence, that's what you would see.
That's correct, but there's not a residence, or many, I can't think of a residence that's building a fence for 100 acres of property.
Well, I
You live in this town, and I saw you at the other meetings, I don't go to attend any of these meetings, but this is a farce. 30-foot buffer, 30 foot? You gotta be kidding me. And I'm hoping that you guys are gonna do something about that. I don't think you have the power to, but a couple of shrubs ain't gonna do it. She said, they're 10 feet, 11 feet, you're talking about 3 to 6 foot shrubs? I can't see it happening. I'm a simple person, but I can't see it happening.
I understand. I hear you. We will do everything that we can. Got to appreciate something is going to go there. Yes.
And just for clarification, it's not just shrubs going in that location, it's shrubs on both sides and evergreen trees. So the 30-foot maintained buffer is the vegetation that we're keeping along that edge. 30 feet is the minimum. It's actually more than that, probably 40 or 50 in certain areas, particularly up kind of near Collins Road, over by where the wetlands kind of come down into there. On the back side of that is where we're actually going to be adding additional buffer through there. So there's another probably 15 feet or so in there of trees and shrubs. So just to clarify.
I appreciate your explanation, but an excellent point has been brought forward here. So it's important that the applicant hear that point right there, because that's going to come up when the plantings go in. That's the commentary that you're going to get. And that's the mechanism that we need to have in place to address that concern right there.
Yeah, I agree. I think we can clarify that and simplify it, because it's best. When things are simple, they're easier to enforce. And I think what we could say is that at the town's election or at its option, if it wishes to add additional plantings and/or a fence, the applicant or the owner has to abide by it. There's no problem doing that. I mean, it's you know, at the end of the day, it's got to work. If it works for the town, a fence or trees, whatever we need to do to make that transition, if you will, from the roadway to the solar array. If it's a fence, the applicant's not opposed to it.
Privacy fence.
Yeah, privacy.
I
The panels.
Right.
Yeah, panel fences.
I'd like to throw something out there for you, just as a clarification for you about what you're up against. In this town, the solar arrays that we already have in place are hideous. There's one here on Route 3, it's terrible. There's one at the end of Francis Barber Road. It doesn't look good. And people are saying, you know, I don't want to look at that. And I can understand they don't want to look at that.
Yeah.
We need some sort of protection
Well,
that this is not going to be that way, that this is going to be a world-class operation.
We're, you know, I guess you have the benefit of the past errors. And so now you can weave those errors into a stipulation or a set of commandments, if you will, that you're willing to abide by. You've got a world-class operator with Amoresco, you can look them up. We've got the ability now to know that the project is not being built on speculation. So we can economically account for these issues. A fence, a shrub, an 8-foot tree is not something that should be a hindrance to a good project.
Okay.
So we'll put that in writing back from the client.
Thank you.
You have one more thought, sir? Yes.
Well, the language that you were discussing previously, where you had a third option or something looking at, I think that should be totally eliminated. Because we're the owners here, we're the town. We are the town, and it impacts all of us that I know in this neighborhood. I don't think that there should be any language saying that, and especially since you're not going to be the owner. You don't even know who the owner is, what you're saying. You know what's going to, it isn't a done deal, but it is a done deal. So you know who the owner, maybe they may sell to someone else. And if that verbiage is in there where they have discretion There's no discretion as far as I'm concerned. And I think it should be the town's discretion completely, 100%. Town doesn't like it, you fix it.
And then the discretion is how do you want to fix it? Either additional buffering or screening, vegetative buffering or screening in, or a fence, panel fence.
100-foot buffer would be better.
Okay, so we're not gonna wordsmith that right now, but.
No, what I think the best way to do it is to, make it a condition of master plan that we provide you at preliminary plan, a list of conditions with regards to buffering and screening.
Anything else for this expert? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So our next witness is Nicole from Sage Engineering. She'll address some environmental.
What time's the name on it?
She's on deck.
Good evening.
Good evening, Nicole Melanathy from Sage Environmental, registered professional engineer in the state of Rhode Island. So I'll just work from top to bottom in regards to the priority sets of comments that were provided back from Crossman. So the first item was, it was noted that there was a map that showed the 500-foot buffer from the property line and showed the residential and commercial buildings and the distance from them and the type of tree cover and tree height that was within that property line to the 500-foot buffer. So for the tree, the forest health for that buffer area, since it's private property, we weren't able to go on and do a full forest assessment for that. So what we did was evaluated aerial photography and the soil maps to determine what type of trees would be there and what their heights would be. So this was done by a certified forester, Mark Tremblay from Land Management Services. It's the same person who did the forest assessment for the property as well as the reforestation plan. And so it was noted that in the southwest portion where the residential homes are that abut it, that those trees were very similar to what is found on the property, which is a mix of similar mature oaks and mixed hardwood trees, the height being 60 to 80 feet. And then other sites, so in the north and on the western side and northeastern side, the soils are more wet, and there was recently abandoned farmland, and so there would be younger trees found there, and their height would be restricted due to the wetness of the soil. But it would be red maple and other mixed hardwoods in that area. They would be generally shorter, 50 to 65 foot range, with one exception, and this is a patch of white pine in the north of the property that would generally have heights of 75 to 80 feet. We then mapped all of the structures found around that and noted whether or not they were commercial property or residential property, and if there was any structures on any of the property, and the closest residential property was 9.71 feet. It was on map 4 lot 26, and then we were calling it a residential annex, so a barn or a garage or something that's detached from the house, is 19 and a half feet from the property line. And then from a commercial standpoint, the closest commercial property is 305 feet from the property line. And as we saw earlier with the new site plans, the layout of the solar panels and the inverters and transformers changed. From an environmental perspective, it's great that we've really opened up that property to allow better movement of wildlife. But we did have to reevaluate noise to ensure that we were still maintaining no noise exceeding 40 decibels from the property line. So we worked with the electrical engineering staff to make sure that the placement of the inverters, because actually the first time around when they moved things around, it was causing exceedances. So we changed the layout to make sure that sound would not exceed 40 decibels at the property line. The closest, I don't know if you want to think of 40 decibel point, it's 234 feet from the property line. So on that map that you're looking there, that red dotted line is the 40 decibel contour. So anything inside of that is above 40 decibels, and anything outside of that is below 40 decibels. And just to put that into perspective, 35 decibels is your typical ambient wilderness. And earlier when we did the study, we went out and took measurements. The sound in the area ranged from 33 to 81 decibels, 81 decibels being along the road, that's from the cars passing by, 33 decibels being on the areas where there's not a lot of traffic and inside the property. So as you move further away, the sound's going to go further down. So the closest structure from any of those 40 decibel contours is 393 feet. So there's not a concern from a noise perspective with this redesign. All the methodology employed for the noise modeling calculations are the same as what we had done previously. There was a question from Crossman in regards to wind impacting the transport of the noise, because the assessment was conservative, assuming that the noise is dissipating out with no interference from any buffering or refracting. So the noise would refract the same sound wave, but it requires a significant wind speed to alter that. So looking at wind in this area at a height of 80 meters, which is trying to get a good estimate for the area, a lot of the winds are done for wind turbines, where here you'd be looking at much lower, 3 meters. And so the wind speed would actually be lower, slower, less speed. But at 80 meters, it's 5.5 to 60 meters per second. So what that means is that sound would really only be moving 6 meters. So we've got a significant buffer from that 40 decibels, so there's not any concern about wind causing any refraction of that sound to be an exceedance of 40 decibels from that property line. There was a question in regards to the reforestation cost, looking at it in future dollars. So we went through and incorporated the cost to do the reforestation plan again, because 30 years down the road, we want to reevaluate the soil types and make sure the reforestation plan that was developed now, that was 2019, but in 2018, is still applicable for 30 years down the road. So incorporating that in, the total cost would be $90,000 for reforestation. Incorporating inflation of 2.6%, that would be future worth of $197,000. And then if you're putting a bond into that, to get to $197,000 30 years from now, you would need $73,800. So the original estimate that we put together was $87,000, actually $87,792. So that would cover the reforestation costs in future dollars. Then the next aspect, which I found is great, that we're able to incorporate some pollinator habitat. So I worked with Kevin, the landscape architect, and he had a great suggestion on a seed mix that had butterfly milkweed as well as other vegetation that would attract pollinators. This is just on the left side is pictures of the vegetation in that seed blend. So the seed blend that he's suggesting is from Ernest Seed, but it would be of a light kind. And the reason that this pollinator habitat is important is because the pollinators are nature's resources for helping plants reproduce. They're going to travel with those pollinators and help carry the pollen on their bodies, and they transport that to other flowering plants. And they play a vital role to our ecosystem. So So the other wild animals that are out there rely on the pollinators for the production of the food source, such as the wild fruits. So things that you may or may not think of pollinators is the birds, bats, butterflies, moths, flies, beetles, wasps, and small mammals, and of course bees. And they're going to visit these flowers, and then they're going to feed off the pollen and then transport that around. And so what we looked at was the type of habitat, and the Rhode Island Wildlife Action Plan has a list of species that they consider of greatest concern for Rhode Island, and look to find that the seed mixture provided vegetation and habitat for them, so that we can not only provide just pollinators, but pollinators that are known to be sensitive in the state of Rhode Island. And so on the right side are just some photos of those wildlife, so a bumblebee, hummingbird, moth, a couple butterflies, and then a dam's fly. These aren't just the only wildlife that these are just some examples of them. So about 6.75 acres is going to be added to this. And so prior that was just going to be mowed grass. So now it's going to be designated as pollinator habitat meadows. It's going to be part of the vegetation management plan. It's managed different than the grass. So grass is going to be maintained, cut several times throughout the year, where this is going to be grown through the year, and then once a year it's going to be mowed down so that it can reestablish itself, so that we can maintain it. So it's a really nice addition to help enhance habitat for this area. And then on top of that, the vegetation that they're choosing for the buffering are native shrubs and trees that are also going to provide additional habitat for other sensitive species in Rhode Island. A little blurry, but there's some photos of some of the birds that are going to be attracted. So the pollinator habitat combined with that vegetation is going to help bring in more birds by providing them that habitat. So combined, it's a great addition from an environmental perspective. One of the other comments that Crossman brought up is that we hadn't, for this property, done a full forest assessment for it. So we had our certified forester, Mark Tremblay, who originally had just done the reforestation plan, come back and do a full forest assessment for this. And this was done before the site layout was changed. So what was done was looking at the areas that were going to be cleared to gain an understanding of what type of trees were found there, so that when it comes to reforestation, we knew what was there, so that when we wanted to bring back this forest land, we know what was there to see if we wanted to either do exactly what was there before or look at the soil conditions and see what was best suited for the time. So the majority of the forest, actually the entire site, is deciduous, overstory, and the majority of it is oaks, hardwood. There is post-scrub saplings that are around, so woody vegetation, and that vegetation is mostly invasive and non-native species. The largest diameter tree found on the site is a Don redwood that was in the backyard of the house. So this is where the house is located. Then there were some other trees surrounding it. There was a clump of white cedar, an eastern red cedar to the south of the house, and a large hemlock, and a single black locust that was found adjacent to the house. And I want to point out that area is not going to be cleared as part of the solar development. There was impact, as you mentioned earlier, due to the gypsy moth. For the oak overstory, combination of the gypsy moth and the forest type caterpillars, and several years of moderate drought conditions. There's a moderate percentage of the upland oak resources that have died in recent years, with much of the mortality in the eastern area of the property, and the eastern area of the property is the majority of the cleared area. So the trees that are going to be cut down is the area, thankfully, where it has the most damage. If you'd like, we can get into some details. We did go through and evaluate. You can see the color coding on this map. the forest assessment report that was submitted as part of the package. This is the same map, it's just been cleaned up and made a little prettier. And so the blue outline is referred to the eastern upland ridge that had the older trees, but also has the most damage to the gypsy moth. And then the green outline is the southwest corner, where there's a couple of small rocky knolls, and the overstory is dominated by a mix of oaks. And then in the middle, that pink outline is the north central area, where those trees are about 70 to 90 years. It was a former agricultural fields, and it developed an overstory that includes a mix of oaks, red maple, and black birch. And then in the northwest corner, they're the youngest trees at 20 years, and it's really an area of early successional shrub, and a lot of that is invasive species in that area. Then it wasn't as part of the questions from Crosby, but you had asked the question about oil containment. So there is the SPCC regulations that everyone must adhere to, but that's dependent on the quantity of oil that they have on site. So regardless of the quantity of oil, the developer will adhere to the requirements of SPCC in regards to secondary containment, such that the pads that are housing the transformers, this is the transformers that have the oil. And to note, the oil that's selected to use is EnviroTemp, which is the safest transformer oil that's available. It's essentially soybean oil. And what they'll do with that is put an oil water separator, so if there was a release, any oil would be captured by the oil containment, and then the rainwater, if there was any precipitation, would then drain out. And there's different methods that can happen. We have to look at the engineering design of what the pads are going to look like to determine what's going to be most cost-effective and effective to ensure that no oil would lose containment. And that's where I bring in the SPCC regulations. They have very specific requirements to ensure that no oil gets into the environment, and so that's the part that we would follow. And so it can be done through membrane filtration, or you could do it through gravity feed to separate them out.
So that, isn't in any of our documents?
No.
Okay.
No.
Well, you'd be amenable to a condition of approval that talks about containment.
Correct. Requiring containment, secondary containment for the transformers.
So say those initials again, SP?
SPCC.
Okay, what does it stand for?
Spill, containment, and countermeasure controls. So it's an EPA federal requirements. It's part of the Regs 112, but it's regulated in Rhode Island by the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management.
It's interesting that we've had several of these come before us, but no one has mentioned the SPCC, and that would be incorporated into the pads.
So whether or not you would be required to fall under SPCC regulations is based on the volume of oil that you have on your site. So if you have a lot of transformers, depending on how much is stored in them.
Would you say that this was a lot of transformers?
I have not quantified the amount of oil on here. Roughly knowing approximately, I'd have to look at exactly the series of the transformer that's being used. They'd be right on the cusp of possibly needing or possibly not needing it. So your smaller solar projects would be below it because it is many thousands of gallons of oil that you need to fall under SPCC regulations.
Okay.
But those SPCC regulations pertain to any oil. So if it's vegetable oil, if it's hydrocarbon oil, anything.
But oil as well, oil, right? So it's the same.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Okay.
Anything else you'd like to add?
That's it. Any questions?
Any board members? Questions?
But those little, the pink ones are staying, where you said you had the largest.
Right, and
trees,
so
that's no longer an issue, right?
correct. The assessment was done before the design changes, so the only area that's impacted now
Is this right here and this over.
All right, So just to summarize from what I heard, just to make sure that it was clear. So the main portion that's going to be cleared already has a lot of gypsy moth damage, and that's in the blue. The green portion, actually I'll go back to the orange portion, is low growth. The trees grew slow because it's wet. Is that right?
So it was previously cleared, so it's all just shrubs and non-native
And
species.
was that the invasive species in the orange? Or was that the green invasive species?
Sorry. This is where the invasive
Okay.
species was. This was, there are some mature trees in here, but there's also a lot of, let's see if that one was there's a lot of thick green briars in that area.
Okay.
But it's really the middle portion of it that is the best. Eastern portion does have some big trees, but there's a lot of the oaks that have been impacted by the gypsy moths or the tent caterpillars. But the important thing of the assessment is it now provides information on what is there so that in the future it's understood, so that when it is reforested, or it's known what was there.
And your estimated reforestation bond or amount is separate from the decommissioning cost?
I believe that would
to
question, I don't know, in regards to the bond for reforestation, are they going to be combined or separate?
Right now, the bond is required under the zone ordinance change.
Right, I think that was over $200,000.
Correct, $247,000, and that was for decommissioning.
Correct.
What we'll do, I think it's more logical to segregate the two, and we'll make the bond for deforestation part of the plan approval from the planning board, and leave the bond that's in place for decommissioning with regards to the zone change as it is under the zone change.
It's reforestation.
Reforestation.
Right, okay.
My only question is, let me take you back to the sound emission
Yes.
chart. Your representation is that there'll be less than 40 decibels at the property line?
Correct.
You're prepared to accept the condition of approval that says that should that amount be exceeded, you would not be permitted to operate?
So the only concern I would have with that is along the road, when cars are traveling, it exceeds 40 decibels.
So you'll come up with an ambient
So a
level?
suggestion that I would have is actually looking at the sound difference.
Yes, exactly.
So, my mind's kind of head cold, so it's either 2 decibels or 3 decibels, I have to look it up because I don't have it written down in front of me, is what the audible ear is going to recognize. And so instead of having a hard number, it would be better to look at what that difference is to see if there'd be an audible difference without the project and then with the project.
So we're not doing this by ear, there's going to be instrumentation.
Oh, in the instrumentation, yes, absolutely. You want to use a type A monitor to do it. That's the one that gives the most precision, where you would do an environmental assessment to evaluate the current sound, where you measure it for 3 days, at a minimum of 24 hours. You measure it in that area and you get the general sound that you have from it. And then when the system is up and running, you do the same thing, and then you look at the difference in the sound. And then as long as it doesn't exceed a value of concern, then, and what we could do is, if 40 decibel is at the property line, we do the assessment before anything goes in, get the measure, look at what that difference is between 40 decibels, and as long as it doesn't exceed that number, that would give a, the only problem is the area where.
You can flip the switch, and if it does exceed it, you don't flip the switch.
Well, and there's also sound barriers that can be placed around the inverters. So yes, flip the switch. It exceeds it, then you put sound barriers around it. That will then further reduce the sound. So there's ways to, once it's going, to reduce the sound.
I wasn't really referring to mitigation. It's a yes or no question.
Yeah, I can answer that. Yeah, unfortunately, the answer to that would have to be no. We don't have an issue with working, cooperating to mitigate, but to have a condition that says that if you exceed X amount of decibels, and not pinpoint the measuring of that, not take into account ambient noise, that becomes very problematic, and at that point, the project becomes unfeasible, because if you can't, if the issue becomes that if it exceeds a certain point, and there's no way of really measuring that, and it's arbitrary, and it's capricious, and it requires us to shut the project down, we wouldn't be able to finance it, we wouldn't be able to get an end user for it, because it would be one of those red flags that would be sufficient enough to scare away anybody.
Listen, I understand completely, but we have an expert telling me that it's not going to be. So we're either going to go with that, or there's going to be a condition.
Well,
I'm asking out of courtesy, but
so I
you
understand.
can impose these conditions.
You can impose it, there's no question about it, because the question is it a reasonable condition? And what I'm suggesting is, what I'd like to do is work a mechanism to first determine mitigation before you go to a draconian measure of shutting it down.
I would like to see a mechanism that we can agree on, not mitigation, how we're going to measure it, to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Well, the goal.
But if the representation is there's not going to be 40 decibels at the property line, then that's your representation. If you can't make that representation, I'd like to hear that now.
Yeah, no question about it, but I think that what I'm saying is that if the representation is, and the representation has been made, that it's no more than 40 decibels, if at field it determines to be that it is in excess of 40 decibels, then the obligation or burden should switch back to us to mitigate, to bring it back down to 40.
And are we going to have a mitigation proposal before us, before we issue our approval?
I can't do that now, I don't know what the issue is going to be, if it's going to be, but the burden is on us at that point to relay a plan that is going to bring that to the representation made. That's going to be no more than 40 decibel at the site.
So I appreciate the realism of that, but consider where we'll be at that point in time. We may be dealing with you, we may not.
Doesn't matter who you're dealing with.
So now we're in a situation where the ground rules have not really been fixed. I'd rather not be there.
John?
Yeah.
The only thing John is nice is the embers, we'll put a barrier around it.
Yeah.
That's it, that's.
So can I just add, so as the developer was saying, the only equipment that is generating sound is the inverters and transformers, and they're all located, you can see them from there, the hotspots. And there's curtains that are designed to go around equipment if it generates sound in excess of whatever the threshold may be. And so my suggestion would be, if this environmental assessment, and I can provide it in writing, the type of equipment and the way that it would be measured, if it is found to exceed 40 decibels, then these noise mitigating barriers must go around the equipment. And it's designed, those barriers are designed for if you're working in a facility and you have to pass by it, so it doesn't hurt your ears from an OSHA standpoint, that it mitigates that sound so that it's not going to emanate past there. And so it's an overkill to automatically put them in without knowing that they're needed. So my suggestion would be that it's written that if during the environmental assessment it exceeds 40 decibels, those must be installed in a certain amount of time, and then the assessment be redone to demonstrate that 40 decibels is not going to exceed.
And you would be providing the details of how that mechanism would be installed in the eventuality that it had to be. That's really all I'm after.
Yeah, I'm okay with that, yes. Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Just so we're not arguing about it.
No, you're right. And what it does for us is it brings us to certainty so that we know what the mechanism is to employ and the time frame in which to do it and do it.
We would feel the same way.
Yeah.
Excellent, thank you.
I'm sorry.
So I can put it in writing and submit to you the way that the study would be conducted and the sound barrier that would be placed around it and how it would work.
So to reiterate that in my terms, I want you to put yourself in the position where you've got your project built, you've thrown the switch, it's too noisy, and now you're going to tell me how we're going to fix it.
Correct.
Okay?
Yes.
So it's sort of like the Offered David's performance standard. The performance standard is less than 40 decibels at the property line. That's it.
Correct.
Right. So no matter who owns the property, this is what we're stating.
Correct.
Along those same lines, when you measured along Route 3, And I bring that up because it's a main road into town. What's the time frame on that? Do you measure it for an hour and take the average, or you just put the meter on and say, oh, this is 40?
So for a true environmental assessment, at a minimum, it should be 24 hours that you're measuring it. Typically, I'll do it for 3 days to get a good representation of it. When I was saying that it was roughly between 33 and 81 decibels, I was just out there walking around getting some sample measurements. It wasn't a true environmental assessment. One would have to be conducted for this, where we would deploy them at different areas around the property to be able to get an understanding, because it is going to be different at different locations. And so part of my submission would be to say, this is where we will deploy them, so that you're not, so somebody doesn't come in and say, I'm just going to put one here. I would say how many we're going to put, where we're going to put them, how long that they'd be there, the type of equipment that would be used. And that then you would do the same thing once you turn it on and get the same measurement, so that you can compare apples to apples and look at what the sound is at those points of interest. So you would have the opportunity to discuss where those sound measurements would occur.
Thank you.
Anything else? Jim?
Just following up on this, is the applicant or the current operator going to monitor the sound? Is this a fox guarding a hen house situation where you're dictating where the sound measurements will be taken, whereas should the town have the authority to walk up to the property line at any arbitrary location and use the equipment? I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, no, the town's gonna have that, because again, under your zoning ordinance stipulation, you have a right to inspect the property every April. That inspection is pretty broad, so you're gonna go in there and you're gonna be inspecting the buffers, the screening, the maintenance plan that's gonna be submitted, and the noise decibel. And you're also going to be inspecting to ensure that any conditions that the planning board puts on, in addition to the conditions that the zoning ordinance has, are also been implemented.
Anyone in the audience for this expert? I saw that hand first. Back, please.
Yeah, I just wanted one more time what SPCC stands for again.
Spill control, countermeasure, containment.
Spill control.
There's an and actually. Spill control, countermeasure, and containment.
Thank you.
Is that it? Barbara?
We were discussing in the landscape the idea of doing a privacy fence on the Maxon hillside. Would that make a difference on the 40 decibels? Because you have the 3 in a row, pretty much on the Maxon Hill side of the project. Would that make a difference in the decibel readings? Because I assume you did these with, it's a chain link fence, so the sound just goes through. Would it make a difference if it was a privacy fence?
So the sound calculations here are very, very conservative because there's no buffering whatsoever. So we didn't take any credit for buffering from any trees or any fence. So if you put the vegetation buffer, that's going to reduce the sound. As well, if you change it from a chain link to a privacy fence, that would further reduce the sound.
And that would further reduce on the Route 3 side then as well?
Correct, any of them.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So I'm not sure how much noise, 40 decibels, or how much this is going to emit. But I do know, in my experience, anything that's mechanical, anything that's built, gets louder in time. It wears and it becomes louder. So you have stated that there's a procedure, a fencing, something that you can put around that if it's tested to be louder. My conclusion would be put it in now, because the town doesn't really care how much money you're making, so it's just going to be an expense to you to put that in. But I don't care what your expense is, because in 5 years or 6 years, it's going to be sold, and then the town is going to be going to the person or company or whoever bought that and try to fight with them to get, they're going to have a discussion on saying, hey, this is too noisy now. It's become noisier each year. Me, the butter, owner, my property value's going down, the noise is going up. Put it in now, make a stipulation that it's going in now. It's not costing the town any money, instead, put it in now. You have the ability to restrict that noise, is what you're saying, so do it.
So the town is gonna have every year the ability to go in
I don't
and
wanna wait
assess
5
it.
years, or I don't wanna wait till we have a
It-
problem, excuse me, I'm sorry. I don't
It
wanna-
wouldn't be 5 years, it would be that year, so let's say 10 years down the road, the equipment does make more noise than what, so the manufacturer does tests on it to then measure it at different distances that are used in order to determine how this noise is going to dissipate from where the inverters and transformers are located. So if those were, let's say, off and 10 years down the line, it is louder, then when the town is on property each year, that's one of the things that they would then say, it's too loud, you need to go into those mitigation methods. Because that's one of the things that we were agreeing on, that if it exceeds 40 decibels, that the town would go in and set up those barriers around it.
I live there 365 days a year. I'm gonna have to wait maybe 364 days, my quality of life is gonna go down.
So-
Until somebody in the town perhaps maybe goes there with a,
So 40 decibels is an extremely low threshold. So 35 decibels is just standing outside and not hearing anything. I have a tool on my phone, I can even measure what we're at right now. It's probably exceeding 40 decibels right now. And so when they go out each year and they go to that property line, and if they, because they can do their spot readings, if they do a spot reading and it exceeds 40 decibels, it's going to be before you even notice the difference. So they could go in and put those mitigations in before you would even notice them. Just to put it into perspective, a car driving down the road is 80 decibels. So I'm not saying that you want to listen to 80 decibels, but just to kind of give an idea of how loud something is, you're not going to be able to notice the 40 decibels. So the
I can hear the highway roaring when they took down all those trees for the golf course there. So we were told that was gonna have no impact. Suddenly I can hear the highway now. This is just, it's in your clear cutting even more. I'm gonna hear the highway more, I'm gonna hear whatever's in there. And this isn't like the ambient noise of living in the country. No, I don't care if I can hear somebody's tractor going at 5 o'clock in the morning. I don't care about the roosters crowing.
So rooster crow is at 90 decibels.
Mechanical noises is not what I signed up for.
And you're not going to, at 40 decibels, you're not going to hear it. They're moved inside the inner portion of the site, and so the noise decimating, sending off from the inverters and the transformers, as you can see, they're way below 40 decibels by the time they even get to the property line. So at the property line, they're below ambient. So you're not going to hear them. And the reason for putting the curtain around it is now you have to look at it, and it's an added thing for your annual inspections to make sure that they're still maintained, and it's an extra that's not warranted. There's a lot of transformers, you may see them on the road if you're traveling. I don't know if anybody's gone to South Kingstown, the Best Eaton. There's huge transformers right there, and you stand right next to them when you're waiting in line to go get your coffee, and you can't hear them. You don't hear the humming sound. And they have the curtain barriers in it. And I don't know who's responsible for them because they're not maintained. They're all tattered and weathered, and you don't hear them, and you're about 10 feet away from them. So I wouldn't be concerned about the sound from these, and I think that there's a lot of steps that are being put in here that should, because 40 decibels is a very low. The World Health Organization has that as any sound actually at 50 decibels is considered something that would wake you from sleep. And 40 decibels is for sensitive individuals, and so we're using the lowest of the low. And actually, Barbara's the one that was really pushing to really use the lowest of low to protect the community, to make sure that they wouldn't hear anything. So I think that there's steps in there to make sure that if you did reach that point when they go on annually that it exceeds 40 decibels, it would be before you would notice it at your property, so that actions could be taken.
So what you're saying is the noise is really irrelevant.
Yes.
Well, you've done all this research, and they put in ways of restricting the noise, but you're saying it's irrelevant. Why would you do all the research on the noise and then make the option to put barriers in if the noise is irrelevant?
So
I don't understand that.
yeah, so the barriers aren't traditionally used in this sense. They're used for facilities that have louder equipment that they're trying to protect employees from, not from this sense. So it's applying technology just in a different use. So it's not like those barriers were designed for inverters and transformers as part of your solar farm to circle them to prevent any mitigation of the sound. It's just technology out there to mitigate sound. And the reason why we look at the sound is to make sure it's a requirement from the town that any of the projects are not exceeding any of your noise ordinances. And in this case, there wasn't a specific noise ordinance for solar. There was noise ordinances for activity happening on your property. And so when working with the town council, that's where the 40 decibels came from, to provide protection for the community, since there wasn't something specifically in the noise ordinance.
So why are you opposed to putting the barriers in that will protect us in the future?
Well, it's added maintenance to go through on it, and it's an added activity that isn't really required. So my recommendation in regards to the noise generating from here, it's not necessary. If this was a louder equipment, then I would say it would
It's
be
going to be louder in
necessary.
10 years.
From what I
All
understand,
mechanical things are louder in
it's
10
not
years.
going to be to the point where you're going to be impacted by it. But you have measures in place to stop it if that is the case.
Okay, good discussion. I saw this hand first.
Yeah, I have a question about the, you had a map, and the map talked about private property, and it talked about industrial property, but you didn't mention state property. And there isn't in the ordinance, or I'm sorry, in the regulations that you use, there's a requirement that significant park property be shaded and be specifically noted. And of course, the Indian rock shelters, in my mind anyway, is very, very significant. In fact, it's Rhode Island historical site number 1. The native peoples are very, very concerned about what's going on there.
That's right here. So it's not.
It's a little further down, isn't it?
It's right on the corner of this road.
No, it's down further. It's an open space.
I went and I researched it on the National Preservation Society. So this road right here, and this road right here are the boundaries. I don't have it with me right now. I had looked into it specifically too, and I'm not sure if it ended up getting submitted to the planning board.
That's precisely the point. I mean, if you don't know where it is.
Oh, no, it is specifically right here.
No, it isn't.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
It
It
is.
was my property.
Thank you.
There's 3 houses.
So this is a map of it right here that comes from the preservation.
I'd much rather have you have a map from the records. I'd much rather you have the
Yeah,
plat
so
and
if
lot map.
you go to your GIS website,
No,
so.
sorry, I go to the town hall and I look in the assessor's plat.
So if you.
And I look at him and I see this next door, and he knows where it is.
Excuse me, I own the property, Collins Road and Access Street that you talk about, I own the property that abuts, then there's 2 houses, and then that state property
Right
is
here.
talking about counts.
So it's
Starts, it's not on the corner.
lot 4, let's see, map 4, 121C. Sorry, I was pointing to here, it's right here.
That's right, and it's 8 acres.
It's
8
right here.
acres.
Yes, I apologize, I was
Significant-
pointing to here, it's right here.
Right, exactly, and I wonder why it's not shaded in the maps.
Because this was addressing a comment where it wasn't provided.
No, I mean all the maps, and the master maps. Every map should have that property shaded, probably in gray, it should be noted, Indian rock shelters, historic site number 1, state of Rhode Island, and it's simply not there. And
It's just not a requirement.
it
It's
is a
part of
requirement. If you
the
look at
plan.
the,
So if you look in the environmental assessment that was submitted as part of these plans, there is a map that shows the location of this, but it's not on every map that we're presenting.
well, it should be, I mean, if I look at the regulations, it says it should be shaded on all the maps.
So
I mean, I'm not addressing you, I'm addressing them, because they're the ones who have to make sure that you conform to the regulation.
All right, let's agree. Have we at least established that we're in agreement as to where this point is?
Yes, we finally
Okay,
found
good
it.
enough. Then we can discuss the shading at another point in
Okay.
time.
Okay, so
Well,
my,
it's
right here.
so my question is more fundamental than that. On the property, right across the street from the Indian Rock Shelters, there's an inventory of customer pad mounted switchgear, a gang-operated disconnected riser, a metering pole, a recloser, and an air brake pole, right? Well, it's on the landscape map, actually. But I can assure you it's there. And do any of these things create any noise?
The spots right
No,
here,
no, it's
that's
on-
where the noise is.
No. I'm asking about the equipment that's on Maxon Hill Road at the southwest corner, southeast corner of the property.
Yeah.
There is supposedly a gate, there's supposedly a chain link fence, a
Yeah.
gate, and you go through the gate and you eventually get to the property. Well, on the road, at that spot, there are these 6 items.
Yeah. Can you read them off again? I just
Sure.
remember this.
Customer pad mounted switchgear, a gang operated disconnect and riser, a metering pole, a recloser, and an air brake pole.
No.
No, what is no?
They don't generate sound.
Yeah, there's 5 utility poles, those are utility poles that you're referencing.
Right.
She can speak to the sound.
So those do not generate sound.
Okay.
It's the only items, part of the solar development that generate sound are inverters and transformers. So none of the, because I believe there's a pole over here and then the pole over here, those aren't generating sound. It's only these points that you see here as blue is where you're going to have sound emanating.
You would agree that that's like industrial stuff that they're putting out on the road?
It's the same poles that you would have.
But the stuff on the poles is not normal.
It's electrical.
It's typical, it's standard typical utility equipment.
Yeah.
Right, that goes for an industrial facility.
Yeah.
No,
You find those things up and down those roads?
You can drive down any street right now, and any piece of equipment that is on those poles will be somewhere located in their utility system.
So the electrical aspect is not my expertise.
I understand.
But from the way I know that they work, from speaking with the electrical engineers on the project, they do not do any process that generates.
Well, see, my concern is the reflection bench on the state park, the mini state
Yeah.
park, okay? And there's a granite memorialization saying dedicated to the Native Americans. And right next to the reflective bench where you're sitting there and you're enjoying or you're meditating or doing whatever you're doing, you look across the street and you see all this stuff. And I don't know what to do.
I can't answer on exactly their layout, where they're going to be. That wasn't something.
Well, I can because it's in the map. I mean, you can look, you don't have to, but I mean, if you look at the map,
Yeah.
there it is, right? It's right there.
I mean, it's the way I understand that they're the same poles that you would see along the road to get power to your house.
We can answer exactly what that information is, so we'll do that right now. They're poles, we'll tell you where they are and where you can see them right now. Just identify yourself.
Tom Lockman, LAG Consultants, our office is in Canton, Massachusetts. I'm a licensed professional engineer in the state of Rhode Island. So the utility poles that will be coming in are typically, as you said, it'll be 3 or 4 poles. It'll be a disconnect switch, a recloser, primary metering, and then a riser that goes down to the underground. That is all standard equipment that you would see on the side of the road, whether it's a strip mall, whether it's a neighborhood for reclosers. It's basically when you see your lights blink 3 different times before the lights finally go up for 4 hours, that's a recloser. So it's a standard piece of equipment that the utility installs throughout their system on pretty much every circuit.
Yeah, where there's a facility that needs.
Nope, they'll be right in the middle of a circuit. That's why, let's say, you know, on a mini.
Any chance? Any of these pictures?
That's Route 3.
No, it's.
You can see the pole on the other side. I mean, I can appreciate what you're saying.
Basically, the recloser that you're referring to, it's a sectionalizing piece of equipment that the utility uses. They're installing them now on solar sites because it gives protection for the utility, for the generating site. But they put them, let's say they have a long feeder, they'll put it in the middle of their feeder. So on a windy day, when you see your lights blink one time, that's because a tree just hit the lines, and that recloser sensed it, tripped, and then closed back in. When it happens 3 times, that's when the lights go out for 4 hours because the tree's on the line or the line's down.
Okay, so I don't want to be an adversary to the gentleman behind me, but, you're big. But because I'm looking at this state park, so to speak, which is dedicated to the Native Americans, it could very well be that those 5 poles or so could be further down. They don't have to be right there.
They have to be at the entrance of the facility, and that's actually basically, that's governed by National Grid as to where they put their poles, and where they want to enter in on their circuit, so.
Okay, so so I should go to them and ask them why they put it in there?
It'll,
I don't mind doing that.
Let me agree with this.
Let
Let me agree with
you
you.
when I go there.
You've heard the concern.
Right.
yes.
Is there any way to relocate, shuffle those things around so that they don't present a visual obstacle for that piece of property across the street?
That would have to be re-looked at and restudied with National Grid as to the entrance point for the.
So then let me offer this on behalf of this gentleman. If there could be a reconsideration, I think the planning board and the community would enjoy.
Well, the issue is, I mean, we've already have an interconnection feasibility study that determines where the connection is coming from. The alternative is to put it in front of a residential dwelling. And that was decided not to do it there, but to move it across from the wooded area. And we didn't feel that that would be something that would be obnoxious to do, because again, you're looking at basic poles that have the standard equipment that National Grid requires. We're not going to dictate to National Grid what equipment we want or don't want. It's actually, they put it in anyhow. It's their connection feed, it's their responsibility. It's not our responsibility, it's not the town's responsibility, and neither one of us want that responsibility.
I understand. All I'm asking is that if there can be a reconsideration, that's great. If you're telling me it can't be done,
It can't be done unless you want it in front of a dwelling.
okay.
You can move it to a
Well,
dwelling.
that's what I say, here's the battle.
Yeah.
This land was dedicated by Mr., the same gentleman that was the first part of Mr. He dedicated that. He has a granite boulder there that you can see from the road. I mean, it's not a mystery to National Grid and to you that that's not just a piece of woods. That's a very, very
It would be an
important
issue
site.
regardless, if it wasn't for the solar project and we did a subdivision, you'd have the same issue because you have the same poles.
And I might have the same discussion.
You would.
Right, so it's not,
You would, and if I could solve it, we would, but I just don't think that we can.
Understand? Got it? Yes, sir.
I have a question on top of that follows that. So that piece of property, those 89 acres, would be barred with stone that they donated to the town, to the state. There's Indian shelter rock in there. That's all Indian artifacts and a shelter area. This array is going 30 feet on the other side of the road. Has that property been searched and checked by the Indian Nation Affairs people to look and see, before we destroy all that property, and cut all the trees down and bulldoze it all over, should they be looking at that piece of property? I think they should be.
So the Rhode Island Preservation Commission evaluated this property as part of the environmental assessment that we did, and they stated that it wouldn't be impactful to
Is
any
that
historical
Indian
property.
Affairs people, or is that the Rhode Island Preservation? There's a difference,
It's
correct?
the Rhode Island Preservation Commission, and they work with them, and they're the ones that make the state.
You have something right from the Indian Affairs Bureau? I know it's brown, because it, can you help me out here?
So, yes, I can share with you my opinion. So, if this were a subdivision, residential subdivision, we would not be imposing that criteria on the applicant. Okay? So here we have an applicant, slightly different use. Sounds like they have already met that question head on.
may I interject? I
I
talked.
just want to make sure this gentleman has his question answered to the best of our abilities at the time.
I don't have enough knowledge about it, but thank you. You take care of it.
Okay, I talked to Charlotte C.W. Taylor, who I've worked with many times in the past, and her role at the preservation is Indian. to her this morning, and she has not been contacted. She doesn't know of anybody in her agency that's been contacted by Crossman or anybody else regarding this property.
She in the same agency as,
Yes.
So there's a division there that handles all of the reviews for it. In the environmental assessment, I can show you the letter, I can look at it for you.
I have a little. No, she doesn't wear it. No, Charlotte could be wrong, so it's possible.
It's Appendix K. And I know they have that available in the town hall too, if you'd like to get it.
So this doesn't mention, you didn't, because the map is not shaded, the applicant has not told the preservation people that there's a significant property on the other side of the road, so they didn't make a judgment on that, they only made a judgment on the lot 25. They didn't consider anything else.
No, they require, I don't have a copy of everything that was submitted to them in that assessment, but when you submit your review to them, there's requirements that must go in there. And I can double verify, it was submitted over a year and a half ago, so I don't remember exactly the map that was submitted. I would have to pull it to see exactly what it looked like when we submitted it, because I'm not 100% sure what was.
Okay.
But part of their job is they look at that lot, and then they pull their maps to look at what they have for information to make that determination. They do it for property all over Rhode Island, because they're not only looking for Indian, they're looking at historical stone walls, they're looking at historical buildings, cemeteries. So even if the map, for an example, of one property I was looking at, we weren't aware about a cemetery, and they actually brought it to that attention. And it wasn't noted on the map. So they're looking at their own information before they submit that letter to us.
So I should go back to them and find out what they're doing.
You can, right? It's a process that goes through. They have, when we submit a request, they have 30 days to provide back to us.
And then the other one, of course, is State DEM, who have not received any documentation yet. So they have not studied this, they have not made any opinions. You haven't notified them.
So we have worked with DEM, and Dave Russo to talk about that in regards to all of the permitting aspects
No,
of that.
in terms of this site, in terms of the rock shelters, they have not been notified.
We're going to take issue with that. We have an insignificant alteration permit from the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. If you're aware of what an insignificant alteration permit is, it's a significant issue. So DEM is not only aware of the project, but we've submitted them a tremendous amount of information over the course of the last 2 years on the project. And they in turn have reviewed that, and they've issued us the insignificant alteration permit. So they definitely have knowledge of the project.
Okay, so maybe I should go to them and point out to them that it is significant.
Yeah, I would. And why don't you write this number down, because this is the number of the correspondence. It's 12705.
Okay, that's
And that's from the Rhode Island Historic Preservation and Heritage Commission. And they state in their correspondence that they've reviewed the documentation in conjunction with their own records.
Okay.
And then you should also contact Glenn Monaco, M-O-D-I-C-A. He's the Senior Project Review Coordinator at 222-2671.
2671, no, that's preservation, that's not DEM.
No, that's preservation. Start there first,
Right, okay.
and then we can give you a copy of the insignificant alteration permit that we received from DEM.
Okay, so after the meeting.
Yeah, we can give you all this, we'll give you the whole book.
that's great, thank you very much. Any other, yes?
I just want to add a comment on that. I know we have another project coming up that there was a statement on the plans that there were no cultural features on the property. And just looking at Google Earth maps, I saw multiple Native American alignment walls on the property. So Rhode Island Historic Preservation Heritage Commission does not have very much knowledge
Which
of
property
what's
are you talking about? Which property are you talking about?
Well, I wasn't bringing it up just because I thought it might not be right, but it could be the Brushy Brook property. I'm just saying that there's stuff you can just see by looking at an aerial photograph. And I'm not saying that there's anything here, and I'm not pushing for anything. I'm just saying, what
If
you
you
hear
want to
from them is not very
criticize,
much.
around historic preservation, you can do so. But what we're saying is that we have handled an issue from the very beginning. The letter that we've submitted was back in January of 2018, so we addressed the issue over a year ago. We didn't address the issue by providing them falsified documents. We're not in that business. So we've met the obligations that we think we need to meet. We've gone to the appropriate agencies that have the authority that can handle the issues, and we're relying on that. I don't know what more else we can do. And couple that with the fact that the planning board doesn't even have the authority within their purview to require us to even do this in the first instance. But we've done it, we did it in conjunction with the zone change, because it was something that was of concern to the applicant, and rightly so, because, again, we want to know what pitfalls they are before they exist.
And just my point, Al, was just that they're not sitting up there at the state, with knowledge of what all is out here. So when they say, we looked at our records and we didn't find anything, it has very limited. Yes, you have done.
What do you want us to do?
I'm not arguing with that.
My point is, what more can we do when the individuals who are cloaked with the appropriate authority give us the documentation that we've requested after we've submitted to them? It's not within our realm to question their authority, to question whether or not they know what they're doing. I mean, we're just going to take that presumption that they do.
That's the standard. I understand. Good. Good question. Yes, Bob.
I was just going to say, if we get back to, I just want to go back to sound for a moment. The Bank Street property in Hope Valley is a solar array that's up and running. And if you park there, the inverters are right by the fence line and the transformer, and you can go right up to them on a nice sunny day and listen.
How many are there?
They're on Bank Street.
Yeah, I know, it's, what I'm insinuating is it's a very small.
It is a small operation, but the inverters are going to be clustered in this kind of array, but they're the same kind of inverters. So you can go right up to them and listen. And the same is true, the transformer is going to be smaller than these, but you can go up to it and listen. And it at least gives you some idea of what these sound like.
That's very good. Thank you. Yes, yes.
One last clarifying point, this may be a question for Mr. Mancini. Regarding the April inspection, that's an on-site inspection. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. So if someone is standing on the street off of the property.
No, that's actually, well, the importance of that condition is to allow the applicant, or is to permit, or require, I should say, is to require the applicant to permit the town to go on site to actually do the inspection, yeah. Sure,
But so if someone's doing a visual inspection from off the property and finds that the operator is deficient in some regard, that's enforceable all year round.
Oh, yeah, no, the only difference is that that condition with regards to the April inspection is just a formal inspection. Sure. The town can, every April, it has it on its calendar to go on site and provide its inspection, but it's not all inclusive, so that doesn't mean that you can't do an inspection in January.
Okay, anything else in the audience? Yes, sir.
I want to go back to the decibels. You had stated in your remarks that there were mitigation devices to be used based on OSHA. What is the OSHA standard in decibels that requires that? That's question number one.
So the way that OSHA looks at it is employees being exposed to it for 8 hours. And so my statement of why these noise barriers are in place was for OSHA requirements. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to mitigate just for OSHA means, because they have permissible limits based on a work of either 8 or 10 hours, depending on what PEL you evaluate it against. But it's not that once you put it there, it's going to stop working. Once it's around there, it's going to mitigate the sound. So my reference to OSHA was not necessarily to compare what we would mitigate it to. The question was, why are there?
I'm
these
asking
numbers?
what is the decibel level that OSHA requires mitigation to take place?
I believe, don't quote me on this, but it's higher. I think it's 60 decibels, but it is higher.
Nicole,
Yes.
it's 85 decibels.
Is it 85 decibels?
Yes.
Thank you.
I have the OSHA books at home.
But the difference is when you're designing these mitigations, you're designing it for the frequency as well as the sound. So it's not like we're just going to pick something from a catalog and say, this is what we're going to use. You actually have to be sure that you're choosing the appropriate noise barrier based on the frequency and the amount and the sound level that's going
I
on.
wasn't questioning your expertise at
Oh,
that.
okay.
I was asking simply because there are those of us here who have been involved in having OSHA come in with noise requirements in factories. So to state that you're doing it based on OSHA, people need to know what that standard is.
Right, but I just want to clarify, the threshold would not be an OSHA threshold, it's the 40 decibel threshold is what things would be compared against. Because it's a big difference.
The other question that I had was that you talked about the cost of reforestation, and you gave a figure for 30 years from now versus the amount that was going to be put in the bond.
Yeah.
I would be interested in knowing what you used as the cost factor, in other words, the inflation factor, what percent that is.
So the inflation factor that I used was 2.6%,
Okay.
and then the bond rate, I used the rate as of November 29th of 2018, just as an example. It does not mean that the developer will use this bond, but just to get an idea, was 3.33%,
Thank you.
because there's different bonds.
I apologize, that must have been when I had to go down and call.
Okay, we all set? Okay, very good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all we have as far as our experts in the presentation. Again, I'm requesting that the board consider the applicant's master plan. We're at the master plan level. As you know, the master plan is a conceptual level, but we're in a unique situation because of the fact that this project is going through already an extended amount of reviews, including the review by the town council, your review in that process for the zone change. We were here at pre-application. We were here at an informational meeting for pre-application. The project was sent out to peer review. Crossman Engineering was able to provide us some very detailed information. We in turn responded to that detailed information. We presented an alternative plan as a result of those comments. At the last meeting, we presented that alternative plan, and now we have further delineated and detailed that alternative plan to you. And I think that at this stage, master plan approval is warranted so that we can be permitted to go to preliminary stage. In that preliminary stage, we will vent out some of the additional engineering issues. Important to note, we do have all the engineering completed, and we do have the approvals in hand from around Department of Environmental Management as well as DOT. What is remaining is Crossman Engineering to further review some of those detailed items, detailed engineering items, to coordinate and collaborate with DEM on those engineering plans. And we anticipate that happening between master plan and preliminary plan, so that when we do return to preliminary plan, you will have a complete report from Crossman, who has reviewed our engineering, which includes the drainage items. And at that point, we will also be able to present to you a list of stipulations. I have already marked down, I think, 6 or 7 stipulations, and what I would hope to do is propose them to you, either directly to the planner or to your solicitor, to allow you an opportunity to review our wordsmithing and then to further massage those stipulations so they can be presented at the preliminary plan. So with that, we're asking for a vote this evening on master plan.
Very good, thank you. So, Jim, thoughts?
I wonder if Mr. Mancini could just give me a little clarification. Who is the prospective owner of this system tonight, as we sit here? Who is the prospective owner of the system?
I feel like that's a trick question. What's perspective owner? Who's the, as we sit right now, who owns the system? Nobody.
Well-
There is no system. The property is owned by Maxon Hill LLC. If the project is approved, it is the intention that this project will be owned by Amoresco. Amoresco will be the owner of the project, who will in turn operate, manage, and facilitate this facility for the purpose of virtual net metering, which will be the subject of a power purchase agreement with Rhode Island Airport Corporation.
I was a little confused by the applicant that you identified here. It's Maxon Hill LLC with a care of Anthony Del Vicario. And I don't know what that means when you say care of.
Essentially,
the
the
applicant.
Maxim Hill LLC is the owner of the property, they're the applicant. When we say care of, Mr. Del Vicario has a power of attorney or has the authority to speak on behalf of Maxim Hill. So he's authorized to provide documentation, presentation, and provide for the form. Your application by state law is signed by the owner.
Maxon Hill.
Correct. And obviously, we can substantiate that with the, which I believe is already part of the record, because I think it's already one of the submissions that was done way back with the zone change.
So any approval the board might make goes to Maxon Hill LLC.
No, any approval that's made by this board will run with the land, so it gets recorded in the land evidence records. And whoever is the owner of the property at the time of the approval is recorded, is attached to that owner, to that realty. So the approval is not, it's not like, the difference is, you can grant the approval to Maxim Hill, but they don't own it. They can't then take that and give it to somebody else. It's owned by the real estate, it's attached, it runs with the land. And that's maybe a term of art, but what that means essentially is that it attaches not to the owner of the real estate, but to the real estate itself. It's like a zoning board, it's like a zoning designation, a use variance and dimensional variance, a subdivision.
Yes, but I follow your thinking, but it's to an applicant. You have an applicant listed on the application.
Yeah.
Whatever approval we
Right.
issue, should that be our inclination, is going to be to the applicant that's listed in the application, yes, no?
Yeah, there's no question about that. And the applicant's the owner.
Yeah. Where it resides.
Yeah. So maybe I just overcomplicated it. But the simple answer, yeah, the approval is to Maxim Hill LLC. They're the applicant and the owner of the real estate.
I just wanted to clarify for the record, that's all.
Yeah.
Because that question has been brought to me by members of the public. and
Sure.
I like to, answer them intelligently as I can.
Yeah.
And also, the reason why I bring it up is because our solar ordinance 246 states that the prospective owner of a proposed PSES shall be the only party eligible to submit an application to the planning board seeking development plan review approval for a proposed project. So I think it's kind of important that we get that straightened out right here, is that do we want people that are not eligible to submit applications to the planning board to submit, or is this bad language in our ordinance? I don't know.
I don't have a ready answer for that.
Yeah, I think I understand somewhat what this thing is explaining. I'm not an attorney and I can't, I understand that things run with the land, such as easements run with lands, but easements also are granted from one party to another that covers a particular piece of property, right? Easements are made by human beings, right? One human being to another human being, or entities party to a party that may be on a parcel. So,
Well, this is important to know. So if you granted an approval to the applicant, but the applicant wasn't the owner of the real estate, the applicant really got nothing, right? Because it's the owner of the real estate that got the benefit of the approvals and not the applicant.
I'm not sitting in front of the application itself.
No, but I'm just saying-
Do we have applicant and owner on this application?
That's why we do that, because otherwise what will happen, I know because we've litigated this, when the applicant has an agreement to buy a piece of property, the approval is granted to the owner, the owner now decides not to sell the property to the applicant. The question is, who owns the approvals? The approvals are run with the land, so it's the owner that owns the approvals and not the applicant, if it's not appropriately addressed in the agreement. So it goes to the old question, beware of what you're buying,
So in this case, the owner of the land, which is Maxim Hill LLC,
which is your applicant,
intends at some point to sell the land to Amoresco
with the improvements, correct?
with the.
Because they run with the land, correct?
Well, we have cases here that come before us where, for example, farms, where the property is not sold to the owner of the system, it's leased to the owner of the system.
That's
So we have all different types of.
And that could happen here too. I mean, you could have a situation where the facility is leased as opposed to being owned. But that wouldn't affect the approvals, because the approvals are in place, they run with the land. That's the reason why you want them running with the land, so that they stay with successors or assignees and successors in interest.
Okay, makes sense.
So listen, the only question in my mind is, do we have all the pieces in place to issue a master plan approval? Should that be the inclination of the board? Or are we better served by letting those pieces come to us? And the two pieces that I heard about this evening, there was some zoning issue that still needs to be resolved. And do we want the Crossman report in front of us before we make a decision?
And then we're gonna change the range to they're gonna move it.
I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that was a tweak that they were going to make between master plan and preliminary.
Correct. Yeah, between master plan and preliminary.
I wasn't thinking they were going to do that tonight.
Okay.
It was only a consideration. So anyway, in my mind, those are the issues. Is it done today and wait for that? Crossman indicates that they have no objection to a master plan, but I don't have their data upon which to make a decision.
Well, Mr. Cabral is here from Crossman, and I'll let him speak for his own memo.
And I just want to add one point too. Just remember, any decision you make for master plan doesn't in any way prohibit anything additional for preliminary.
Yes.
So it's not.
Yes, but it is a very important step nonetheless.
Master plan is very important, obviously, because it creates a vesting right.
That is correct. So we're treading carefully. Good evening, sir.
Hello, I'm Stephen Cabral with Crossman Engineering. And as you know, we first reviewed the project back in October. We were given the master plan submission. And the unique aspect of this project's master plan submission was the level of detail that was provided. In essence, it was a final design package. And because that final design detail was provided with the master plan, we reviewed each and every item in that master plan submission. So we prepared a review memo back in October, and actually it was about 12 pages worth of technical comments. And since that time, even though we never take a position for or against the project, because our role is just to identify technical issues and conforms to town regulations to assist the board in making the decision. What I will say is, since our 12-page technical comments were provided to the applicant, I must compliment them, as they've done everything that I could imagine they could do to address each of the comments. There was no pushback whatsoever. And as you can see on the plans, they've opened up the wildlife corridor, and they've completely revamped the drainage system. They've enhanced the buffers, they've made the plantings more dense, the evergreens taller. So conceptually, we are confident that they've addressed the normal issues that are addressed at the master plan stage. And the reason I can say that is the master plan stage is really a conceptual design, it's not the final details. Now, in the memo that I issued today, it was a brief memo, and the reason was because of the extent of the work that they performed, we just recently received the package at the same time you did. So we haven't had the time to actually do a detailed review in the same manner that we did in October. We do intend on doing that, but those issues are really, in our eyes, final design details, which we typically see at the preliminary stage. So that's why we were confident in saying that we have no objection to proceeding with the master plan approval, with an understanding that all of the details of the drainage design, the landscape buffers, have to be ironed out. Now, the one master plan topic that it would be great if we could resolve is whether or not the perimeter access drives would be allowed in the front yard or side yard setbacks. That's really the only master plan level item that I see. Everything else about the size of the plantings or the depth of the drainage ponds, I do consider to be more of the preliminary plan stage.
Good, so that driveway issue, that's the zoning
That's the
thing that
zone.
was raised earlier?
Yes, and basically along Maxim Hill in the section along Main Street, there's the stone access drive that runs parallel to those streets in the front yard setback. And there is also, they also act as a drainage system. So in the perfect world, they would be outside of the front yard setback so that we could have an added buffer. But like you had said, it's a zoning issue, and really the zoning official is the one to decide whether or not those are allowed in the setbacks.
Okay, very good. Thank you, sir. Any board members, any questions for the Crossman representative, Stephen? Thank you. Okay, so, any board members, what's your pleasure?
I feel the applicant has done everything that we've asked them to do, and they've done a nice job of doing it. And I don't say that lightly because, as you know, I've been in the business for 45 years. They've addressed everything we've asked them to address, so I think moving forward with the master plan approval, right before that.
Does the master plan approval have to include our conditions, or are those items more in the preliminary plan?
That is my question precisely. Because I have a whole list of conditions, and Jim or Kevin guide us. Is this the appropriate time? Does that come at preliminary? What's our answer?
Earlier the better. Could come later, but earlier the better, I would say, from a lighting standpoint.
And so if there were additional concerns in the preliminary plan, excuse me, speaking, can we add those in as well? Or is it, okay.
Good.
I think everything should be on board right from the beginning, rather than adding things on and adding things on.
What's your thought with regards to perhaps issuing a decision this evening as opposed to later? How do you follow?
I'm comfortable saying tonight.
No.
No. We got everything in line. Still outstanding issues.
Madam Chair, what do you think?
I think Crossman's view swayed me more to agreeing to master plan with our conditions in place that will be taken care of between now and when they come back to the preliminary plan.
I was reluctant until Stephen stepped forward and straightened me out. I don't see any reason to spend an extra month. So, that said, again, I have a whole boatload of conditions that I'm prepared to give to somebody who'd like to make a motion, and as long as they get included, I'm prepared to entertain such a motion.
So Jim, just for clarification, we would have to state in our motion that the applicant has made the findings as stated in our master plan approval, and then after we state that, we would have following the conditions.
Yeah, I would say the notice should probably go to the effect that the applicant, upon satisfying all of the conditions that you lay out, okay, that the project will, that you will be able to make those positive findings of fact based upon those conditions, with all those conditions that you do. So.
Oh, we should do the conditions before we do that then?
Well, no, they normally do the conditions second. So you were right, Amy,
Okay.
the first time that the planning board makes the finding, positive findings of fact, subject to the applicant complying with the following
Okay, all right.
conditions.
Yes.
So is Al allowed to say the conditions, or do I need to say that?
I'd like to suggest that if you're amenable, because you may have some conditions of your own, that you simply incorporate mine.
Okay.
I've highlighted the ones that I'm interested in seeing. And the only one that, forgive me for thinking out loud here. This is being modified with the consent of the applicant.
I say we stick with its performance standard, 40 decibels above.
Well, we want to add in the fact that they're going to provide the mitigation details. Right, I'll write that in. And we had, what did they decide to do here?
Oh, that was
Once you get that coming.
SPCCC. I think we're going to state that we would like it contained per the, I want to contain it at the level of its gross. I just think we just,
Fire number clarify, yes, request or requires 125%.
that's
That's what we have. So then we're down to Jim, and perhaps you can just refresh me. Has anything in the application addressed abandonment?
Oh, is that in our ordinance does?
The ordinance will cover that.
How about removal requirements? Also in the ordinance. Decommissioning, we talked about tonight. And then, what about, and join in this discussion. When the project goes sideways, whose door are we knocking on, and what is our enforcement option?
So, that's a good point. Going back to the zoning board, is going back to the town council decision, item number 2 is the decommissioning bond, and that addresses the issue of not only abandonment, but in the event that the project does go south, if you will. Now, for practical terms, if the project goes south, the likelihood is that it's not going to just be abandoned. It's going to end up in a receivership process where someone else is going to end up operating it, governing it, and the town will be made part of that. But in the event that it all goes to heck in a handbasket, then there is a decommissioning bond, which essentially means the removal of the material in the amount of $264,500 already established. And then we can also kick in the additional bond for the replanting, the reforestation bond that was proposed and talked about tonight. So it allows for 2 elements to take place. One is for all the removal of the equipment, and then your ability to replant the property.
Okay, that goes a long way. How about the hopefully unlikely instance where in the middle of construction, the proper procedures and mechanisms have not been followed? There's runoff, there's erosion, there's bad things happening.
So there's going to be...
What option does the town have to bring it all back into perspective?
So you have we would receive a building permit to commence the construction of the project.
John, excuse me.
Yep.
One second.
Yeah, of course.
I want you to a perfect answer.
During the construction aspect of it, so you get the building permit that comes out. One of the requirements when you get a building permit, similar to a subdivision, where you put in the road, you have to file a performance bond for the completion of the road in the event that doesn't happen. Well, the developer, the contractor, will also have to file with the town a performance bond to ensure that the project does get completed. That performance bond will run to the town in the event that it ceases mid-operations or mid construction, there's the ability to finish it.
Is that written down somewhere?
All that's going to be a requirement of, that will be a requirement of the issuance of the building permit.
I'm not certain.
Forgive me, but I would take your word for that. Do you know that to be a fact? Is that a law, a statute, what?
It's usually a town regulation, but I haven't seen your ordinance in a year, so I don't know if it's in your town zoning, if it's in your town solar ordinance.
So you'd be amenable to a condition
Yeah,
that states
perform,
something to that effect?
We'll provide a performance bond, sure, at the time of the issuance of the building permit.
And that would be the owner and/or the contractor?
It would be the contractor that would provide for the performance bond.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we had a situation, nothing to do with solar, of a fairly new residential subdivision in town. There was some unanticipated, you might say, flooding of the road and icing over in wintertime is a real problem. And the performance bond, construction performance bond was still in effect, and the town basically jumped all over it, and they were forced to fix that whole problem. So that's the only reason I'm mentioning that is that's a function of a performance bond while it's in place.
So is it still appropriate to add it as a condition, or is there some overriding?
You can, but the nature of the beast is that it gives the town all that leverage while the performance bond is in effect, and until they sign them up and agree that everything's been done according to Hoyle, then the bond is released.
I understand, but at the appropriate time, is the building official going to know to do this? Is it written down somewhere?
No.
So it's going to be a condition?
Yeah, that's fine.
It's not a function of the building officials to do that. The performance, well, yeah, normally, I mean, that particular performance bond was put in place by the planning board, and it pertained to a subdivision, not a project of this nature. And since that time, now, I think it's a good idea to propose a condition if they're amenable to agreeing to a bond of that nature. But normally, you know, the regulations have changed. We only in extreme situations do we even allow bonding to happen on residential subdivisions. You build it completely because of that problem we had. Okay, but the bond, the amount of the bond was put in place by an action of the planning board. You're not going to see the building official. You know.
So how about if we set the amount of bond at the preliminary?
Yeah, we can do that, and we have no problem with that condition. So what is appropriate is that the applicant/owner would be obligated to have a contractor present a performance bond for the construction.
And not deemed appropriate by the planning board at
Preliminary.
sometimes.
Yeah.
He's supposed to come up with a estimated cost of the construction of all the improvements. And then once the cost of all those improvements are estimated, then a bond is put in place sufficient to do 100% of the project.
Yeah. Right? But we're going to lag that because that's usually determined, these tax assessors usually use that as a basis for a tax assessment. So we'll come up with a lower number. Just trying to be forthright.
No.
I want to talk about that more?
No. The applicant is, every time you guys say jump, they say how they did it. So I think that settles it. I think the problems that I have here are hopefully no questions, and that's in that regard.
Because we can see it again.
That's right, yeah. So the issues that I have, you're addressing the conditions, and then other issues are confusing. We're here.
I think one was everything that we discussed or asked for, the applicant has come forward and addressed, and I don't see any reason why they wouldn't continue to do that in the preliminary.
If I may, I think many of the discussions that you're having really are points for preliminary. And I think at preliminary you'll be in a better position to really hammer down the language necessary for the stipulations.
many of the conditions that I'm proposing are rather broad.
Okay, okay.
So if there is a more detailed version of it that needs to emerge, I think we can do that. I just want to make sure that we captured the intent.
Yeah, okay. And I just want to, because we're technically, although we provided you with all the detailed information, we're still at the conceptual plan. So I think as long as your conditions are conceptual in nature, that allows us the opportunity to further elaborate on them and be more specific at preliminary. We're fine with that, as long as we have the opportunity to wordsmith it.
I understand. I think we can do that.
Yeah.
Kevin, do I need to take the lot and all of that, for this, or are we good, we're still just talking about this agenda item?
What was introduced at the beginning, so you
Okay. So I'd like to make a motion that the planning board makes a positive finding on the following 7 standards in Article 3, Section A of the Hopkinton Land Development and Subdivision Regulations. The first is that the proposed development is consistent with the comprehensive community plan and/or has satisfactorily addressed the issues where there may be inconsistencies. 2, that the proposed development is in compliance with the standards and provisions of the municipality's zoning ordinance. 3, there will be no significant negative environmental impacts from the proposed development as shown on the final plan with all required conditions of approval. 4, that the subdivision as proposed will not result in the creation of individual lots with any physical constraints of development, that building on those lots according to the pertinent regulations and building standards would be impracticable. Lots with physical constraints to development may be created only if identified as permanent open space or permanently reserved for a public purpose on the approved recorded plans. 5, that all proposed land developments and all subdivision lots have adequate and permanent physical access to a public street. Lot frontage on a public street without physical access shall not be considered in compliance with this requirement. 6, the proposed development provides safe circulation of pedestrian and vehicular traffic for surface water runoff control, for suitable building sites, and for preservation of natural, historical, or cultural features that contribute to the attractiveness of the community, and that the design and location of streets, building lots, utilities, drainage improvements, and other improvements in each subdivision shall minimize flooding and soil erosion. This is all subject to the applicant following the next conditions. The first conditions is that the panels shall be constructed so that the rows of panels should be tangent to a straight or curved line, not wavy or uneven. The second is that the proposed PSES shall be designed and constructed in accordance with all applicable fire codes, as such may be interpreted by the fire marshal. The construction of any PSES will not be allowed until the design has been approved by the fire marshal. The third is that the proposed PSES will not prevent the normal and orderly use, development, and improvement of the adjacent property for uses permitted in the district. The next one is that it shall avoid any disruption, interference with, or loss of radio, telephone, television, or similar signals that shall mitigate any such harm caused by the PSES. All precautions must be taken to protect neighboring properties from exposure to any radiation produced as a result of the PSES, including but not limited to high levels of radio frequency and electromagnetic radiation. Radio frequency electromagnetic radiation. In addition, the sound emitted by the PSES will not exceed 40 decibels at the property line, and mitigation is going to be provided if this is going to happen, details in sound. And our next one is that no blasting will be conducted on the parcel in conjunction with any activity related to the construction of the PSES, including land preparation, and that the PSES and equipment shall not have significant impact upon the soils, water resources, air quality, or other natural resources of the land or surrounding area. This is going to be triggering. Can you help me with that? Pertinent, Mr. Russo, how do we say that? Pertinent?
Yeah, you're talking about appurtenant?
Appurtenant?
Yeah.
Okay, all the pertinent structures and equipment shall be screened from view by vegetation and joined or clustered to avoid adverse visual impacts to any adjacent property that is residentially zoned and are used for residential purposes. And I will state for also cultural references, especially property, that would be 4121C, as stated as being of cultural significance. Any equipment that utilizes fluid shall be outfitted with a containment mechanism sufficient to contain at least 125% of said fluid, and which prevents said fluid contact with the ground. Throughout the life of the project, the owner of the PSES will provide copies of all correspondence with federal and state agencies pertaining to project permits and regulatory requirements. And the applicant shall submit an as-built plan prepared, stamped, and signed by a registered professional land surveyor, licensed and currently authorized to practice in the state of Rhode Island, showing the actual location of any installed solar equipment. If the equipment is not installed as permitted, the town may order its removal and/or relocation as appropriate. The applicant shall maintain the PSES in a neat, clean, operable condition at all times, ensuring the structural and technical integrity of the facility. All maintenance shall be performed in a timely manner. Maintenance shall include but not be limited to structural repairs and integrity for security measures. The site access shall be maintained to a level acceptable to the fire chief and emergency medical services. The applicant shall be responsible for the cost of maintaining the PSES and any access road unless adapted as a public way, and shall bear the cost of repairing any damage occurring as a result of operation and construction.
Yes.
The town's engineer or designee shall inspect the PSES at the expense of the applicant or current owner, I suppose, on a monthly basis during construction and during the month of April each year after completion of construction. Said inspection will include a review of any and all reports as required by the state of Rhode Island, the town of Hopkinton, and the federal government. The applicant shall reimburse the town for any cost incurred as specified in the stormwater facility maintenance agreement. And let's see. That the applicant agrees that the applicant or said owner will have a contract performance bond at issuance of the building permit, and that set amount will be determined at preliminary. And that's all we have. Our zoning determination regarding to the road. So
Structures that might be in the site.
that if the zoning department feels that the structures of the road constitute part of the project, they need to be moved back to the setback. With that information.
I have a motion. Second. I have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed?
Thank you.
So we still have quite an agenda to get through. I don't need to throw you out, but please move along. which I see there is none. Jump ahead. Planners report. Correspondence and updates. Solicitors report. Public comment.
A reminder that at the PSCS meeting we were talking about, one of the things we did come up with was weekly inspections rather than monthly, because you can nip something in the bud. After a month, you can just shoot to the wall.
Structure.
Yeah, but that's a very good point, of course. However, I have not read this document. This is the soil erosion and sediment control plan. I can almost guarantee you that weekly inspections are in here, in addition to inspections after each and every rainfall. Almost guarantee it. I did not write it.
Thank you very much. I just liked that change.
Anything else on the public comment? Yes.
I think that somebody should be checking whether businesses are legitimate, whether they have active licenses or revoked licenses. It's not done by the town clerk and it's not done by the planning board. And I was going to refer you guys, I think somebody needs to ask the town solicitor who should be doing that and how it should be done.
Let's ask right now.
I think it should be done.
In order to file an application with the town, the application has to be filed by the owner of the property or someone who has been given, typically in a purchase and sales agreement or something, given a property right which entitles them to file an application. Usually it's preferably both. So when an application like this is filed with the town by a party that represents that they are the owner, there is no automatic mechanism or review required or called for. There's no procedure for that. If it turns out there was some defect in the legal status of the entity that applied, that can be brought up at a different time. It's certainly not a planning board issue at this point. It's a presumption of regularity that goes along with an application filed in good faith. If there's a technical problem with the corporate standing, there are procedures to resolve that, which are fairly routine and routinely granted. So I'm just suggesting that there is not a process that is in place once the application is accepted by the town.
So my follow-up question to that response is, in the event that some defect was discovered, does it have any substantial impact on the workings of this board?
No, this is not the function of the board to look behind that.
So whose function is it?
Well, if the planning board makes a decision that someone who has standing to file an appeal wants to make, then they can do that. But I'm suggesting that it's not the role or the function or the responsibility of the planning board to assume irregularities in applications that are filed by record title owners to property.
There you have it. Perhaps it needs to be changed, but that's the way it is, Barbara.
I just have a question, sort of along that line. It's sort of, Kevin, it's a question for you too. Do we even have the right to ask people if they're going to sell the property? I mean, a person can sell their property to whomever they want at whatever time they want. Why do we need to know whether it is to be sold or not sold?
Well, that's not the question that Councilwoman Davis was asking.
I'm saying.
Oh, no, I'm
What was
not,
it,
I'm
the
not
question
talking about
to
that question. I just, over the course when we were talking about, well, you own it, but you're going to sell it.
Yeah,
Of course we would know who it was because we have to tax someone.
the town has the right to ask, but they don't have the right to require a response, nor can they put any restriction on reconveyancing the property. That's a basic constitutional right of the property.
That's what I thought, is that we really don't have any right to do that.
Right.
That wasn't my question.
No, it wasn't. I wasn't responding to your question.
Okay.
This
Jim?
is separate.
Jim raised a question earlier, though, but it had to do with the fact that our regulation requires that that entity be disclosed. I think that's all he was stating.
I don't think the entity that he is going to sell it to, the fact that it was Mr. Del Picardo and Maxon Hill, are they the same person? That's what I thought he was requesting, not whether Maxon Hill is Amoresco. I just don't think we have the right to go and ask any property owner, well, we're going to give you this, but who are you selling it to? I just don't think we have that right, property right.
No, but what if, what I said to Kevin was, what if the person who's applying as a business is not, has, their license has been revoked by the
I know,
state?
but I'm not.
I'm asking that part.
I know you
So
say
are they
it's subject
legitimate
to
business
federal.
to even apply?
We
That's
have
my
to-
question.
I think
They have
we
to be the
assume-
owner of the property to apply.
But you have to assume honesty. I mean, we're humans.
It's not up to the town.
The owner of the property is applying in this case.
Yes.
Right? Maxon Hill LLC owns the property.
And that's all that needs to be inquired. It's not the province of the planning board to look behind it.
Right.
Yes, and the overarching response was, even if that were true, that an entity came forward that was subsequently discovered to be inaccurate, it has no bearing on the decision of the planning board.
Right. Right. So, but don't you think we ought to, somebody ought to, at the town level, ought to be responsible for verifying, I just say verifying,
I will
that it's a
not,
legitimate business?
I will not argue with that, but if, it's not just a business. It would have to be every applicant that comes before the planning board would have to be
Every single person. Every single person.
investigated.
And what's the level of
And you
integrity
can't-
check or?
You just can't.
I'm not saying it's a bad idea. Just has never been done in the
Standard.
And just to point out, just to carry an example to clarify why this makes some sense logically. If you're asking about the corporate standing with the Secretary of State's office of a particular entity, you can check on January 2nd, 2019, and you could get a certain answer. You could check a week before that and get a completely different answer. You could check a week after that and get a completely different answer. So the question is, who was the owner who applied for the relief at the time the application was filed? That's the only question that the town needs to go forward with this. And after that, it's up to, because it's not frozen in time. It can change every single day, the corporate status of somebody. And you certainly can't talk about it in terms of a legitimate business, because that's why I chose a specific example of whether it's in good standing with the Secretary of State's office.
And if it's not?
Well, it depends. When it's not, when it was, who owns the property. All we care about is who owns the property.
But isn't it true that a LLC needs to have a person to be served? And if they don't have a person to be served, you have a legitimate question to ask, who is the person to be served?
You have to look at the applications for the LLCs. There's different requirements. For a standard traditional corporation has a registered agent, which I think is what you're getting.
Right.
But there are all different kinds of variations on that in the modern law. Even since I started practicing 38 years ago, there was no such thing as an LLC or a PC, all these different limited liability companies. This is all gone to, and they all have different requirements about who. There always has to be a contact person. They're not necessarily called a registered agent. That's the only point.
Right, that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, they can be called a shareholder. There's a whole bunch of things. But it depends on the specific type of entity, and it depends on when you're talking about. It's not an easy thing to answer as a general rule. That's all.
Very good, thank you. Anything else on the public comment?
Well, I want to thank you guys. You did a great job tonight. And the motion, I think, is really good.
It's only our first. We'll have another one next time they come.
No, I really appreciate it
Well, that's
coming
good,
in.
thank you. We appreciate all your input. All right, date of the next meeting is February 6th. If there's no snow. Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion. Second. All in favor? Aye.